The powerful Duchy of Castline makes a grand entrance at a high society banquet. Leading the pack is the fierce second son Lysianthus. Right beside him is the calm and collected third son Larspur. The nobles immediately start whispering about the family's legendary status as guardians of the northern barrier. They notice the eldest son, Raymond, is missing from the event, assuming he's tied up with serious family business. The crowd can't help but praise the Castlines for keeping the entire empire safe and at peace. But all eyes quickly shift to the youngest lady of the house, rocking a dress so exquisite even the capital royals couldn't afford it. Her bright, sunny smile proves exactly why her adopted family treats her like absolute royalty. Meanwhile, a lone blonde girl stands completely isolated in the shadows, watching them shine in the spotlight. The gossiping nobles quietly tear into her, admitting she has a pretty face but a completely toxic personality. Rumor has it she even tried to slip the young duke a totally unhinged love potion made from her own blood and hair. While the cute adopted daughter Bibai is the beloved center of attention. The blonde girl is Titania, the imperial family's ultimate troublemaking princess. Feeling the heavy weight of their stares, Titania quietly slips away down a dark corridor. She knows it's impossible to compete with the beloved Castline family. After all, Bibai is the main character of this world, and Titania is just the doomed villainess. She suddenly recalls the exact moment all her past life memories came flooding back to her. She was literally plummeting from a balcony like a broken ragdoll. Midair, she realized she had been reincarnated straight into a fantasy novel. And not just as anyone, but as Titania, the story's absolute worst menace. In this book, the imperial family are basically just petty extras designed to make the protagonist's life miserable. The Castline Duchy actually holds all the real wealth, history, and military power. So to keep these absolute units in check, the scheming royals devised a trap. They forcefully engaged their nuisance princess to the duchy's most talented eldest son, Raymond. Naturally, the duke is just grinding his teeth, waiting for the perfect excuse to rip up the marriage contract. But then a massive plot twist threw a wrench in everyone's plans. Titania actually became insanely obsessed with her new fiancé. Her deep trauma traces back to her mother, who was forced to marry the emperor after her true love was murdered. The shock sent her into premature labor, and she spent the rest of her life locked away in complete isolation. The emperor quickly forgot about her, easily distracted by the sly first empress. Left completely abandoned, Titania fell totally out of favor with the royal family. Starved for attention, she clung to Raymond in the most twisted ways possible, throwing massive tantrums whenever he looked at another girl. She constantly insulted his family, making their entire relationship straight-up radioactive. Back in the present, Titania realizes her past self was a colossal idiot. She cringes out of her mind, wishing her memories had kicked in before she completely ruined her reputation. Now she's already permanently branded as a psycho stalker by her future in-laws. But the embarrassment is the least of her problems. If she follows the novel's plot, she is heading straight for a brutal game over. In the original story, the first empress manipulates a highly anxious Titania, whispering fake rumors that the emperor plans to cancel her engagement to Raymond. And instead, he plans to marry the darling Bibai off to the first prince. The empress purposely feeds her this toxic lie just to trigger a meltdown. Falling for the bait, the original Titania foolishly tries to slip poison into Bibai's tea. But since she's attacking the protagonist with a sloppy plan, it spectacularly backfires. This leads to Raymond pressing a cold steel blade right against her throat. Sobbing, she desperately begs for his love, asking why he treats her like garbage. She cries out that he's always looked at her like she's a disgusting bug. Her heart shatters as she realizes her lifelong obsession meant absolutely nothing to him. Raymond just glares down at her, coldly stating he's glad she finally got the memo. Sitting alone in her room, the current Titania violently shivers, absolutely terrified of the gruesome fate waiting for her. Titania shivers in pure terror, wondering why her past self ever obsessed over such a cold-blooded guy. Especially when it meant bullying her future sister-in-law, Bibai, who is literally a walking ray of sunshine. Suddenly, her panicked maids shake her out of her spiraling thoughts. They yank her out of bed, insisting she needs to get dressed immediately because her fiancé is on his way. Titania's eyes go wide, completely blindsided by his terrible timing. She gulps hard, knowing she absolutely cannot face him right now. If she follows the original plot, she's on a one-way ticket to a brutal execution. After all, how could a neglected princess ever compete with the world's precious main character? She fiercely rejects her doomed fate, totally determined to survive her precious second life. Her new master plan: secure an immediate annulment, secure a massive bag of gold, and escape the empire on a luxury ship. She refuses to repeat her past self's catastrophic mistakes. But to achieve that ultimate tropical vacation, she has to survive today's crisis first. She vows to live a ridiculously amazing life just to spite them all. The maids snap her back to reality, rushing her down the grand hallway. They casually tell her not to worry about her injuries, offering to call a priest through her mother. Titania side-eyes them hard. They ignored her wounds for 3 whole days, but now that Raymond is visiting, they suddenly care. It's painfully obvious they just don't want the powerful Duke to realize she's being treated like a discarded ragdoll. The royals would be totally humiliated if their forced marriage pawn looked like damaged goods. Titania coldly realizes that almost every servant in her palace is secretly a spy for someone else. And she knows perfectly well her mother wouldn't lift a finger to send a priest anyway. Suddenly, the stern head maid steps in, offering to contact the second consort herself. But Titania knows this maid is actually a lackey for the wicked first consort, plotting her downfall. Her sneaky trap is to let Titania's mother reject her, then swoop in with the first consort's fake mercy to manipulate her. The old Titania would have swallowed that sweet talk hook, line, and sinker. But the new Titania isn't playing their twisted little games anymore. Instead, she innocently asks if Raymond is used to seeing injured people since he fights on the front lines. She hits them with a massive curveball, happily declaring she'll just greet him looking completely beat up. The maids absolutely lose their minds, panicking over her disheveled appearance. Titania just blinks innocently, throwing their own fake compliments right back in their faces. She internally laughs, letting absolute karma wreck their manipulative plans. They desperately try to guilt-trip her into dressing up, but she instantly shuts them down. She acts deeply offended, loudly asking if they think Raymond won't like her natural look, making the maids sweat bullets. They awkwardly backtrack while Titania smirks, knowing they're just terrified of Raymond canceling the engagement. Honestly, she'd throw a whole party if he dumped her right now. Suddenly, the massive doors open, announcing the young Duke's arrival. Raymond strides into the room, radiating an incredibly cold and intense aura. He looks down, his sharp eyes catching sight of his chaotic fiancée. Titania stands quietly before him, looking totally exhausted and bandaged up. Raymond just assumes her injuries are another one of her dramatic, attention-seeking lies. He remembers his aide being completely baffled that she fell from a second-story balcony into a full-blown coma. His aide was convinced she faked the whole stunt just to drag Raymond to the palace. Raymond recalls his father's strict orders to never show an ounce of weakness to the imperial family. Ever since he was a kid, he promised to keep his emotional walls completely reinforced. But then his mind drifts back to the very first time they met as children. Little Titania was so stunningly beautiful that young Raymond completely froze in his tracks. He admits that if she had stayed that sweet, he wouldn't despise her so much today. But as they grew up, her toxic obsession turned her into a total nightmare. He remembers her throwing massive, jealous fits anytime he even looked at another noble lady at banquets. Yet despite all her annoying tantrums, seeing her truly sob in genuine despair was completely unsettling to him. He realizes he actually pitied her broken heart, but with their families locked in a fierce political war, there was absolutely nothing he could do. Raymond justifies his cold demeanor, knowing he bears the massive weight of being the future Duke. With his father's health fading and his siblings still young, he has absolutely zero time for games. He has to protect the Northern Front and guard a dangerous bloodline secret from the world. So when he arrives at the princess's palace, he fully expects her usual annoying routine. He figures her injury is just a pathetic excuse, expecting her to be dressed to the nines and ready to throw a massive tantrum. But as the heavy doors swing open, he is completely blindsided. His aide literally sweats in confusion, wondering why the usually flashy princess is rocking such a shabby plain look. Raymond stares in absolute disbelief, his brain totally short-circuiting. Without missing a beat, Titania calmly asks him to dismiss his aide so they can talk in private. Raymond is instantly suspicious. Normally, she'd be begging for his attention, or throwing a massive fit that he didn't instantly shower her with pity. She used to stare at him with deeply desperate, obsessive eyes. But now, her eyes are completely dead, showing absolutely zero emotion when she looks at him. Taking a casual sip of her tea, she drops a massive lore bomb about an abandoned iron mine on her mother's territory. She mentions that most people avoid the mountain because it's supposedly haunted. But deep in that mine lies the ancient insignia of Gloriana. Raymond is completely stunned. The insignia is a legendary weapon from the founding myth of the Empire. Back in the day, the first emperor and 4 heroes defeated the demonic beasts with elemental powers granted by a god. The imperial family was gifted the power of light, but over time they completely lost it. Now only the Castline Duchy remains to guard the barrier, and they are dangerously close to their limit. The insignia is basically their last resort to survive. It's a closely guarded secret that the royal family is absolutely not supposed to know. Without hesitating, Raymond instantly draws his sword. He points the heavy blade right across the table, demanding to know her true endgame. He glares at her, clearly viewing her as a massive threat now. He coldly demands to know what she actually wants from him. Internally, Titania is screaming that she just wants an annulment, 50 million gold, and a luxury escape route. But she bites her tongue, playfully calling the information a secret gift instead. She knows Raymond is highly transactional and only moves when there's a clear benefit. She brings up a rare, blood-red sword his family recently acquired. She recalls how he shocked high society by sharing the first dance with a vassal's daughter just to get a special garnet. To everyone else, it looked like a weird trade for a guy who hates socializing. But Titania smirks, revealing she knows he was just playing 5D chess to distract the nobles. He used the scandalous gossip to totally mask the fact that he secured an ancient, insanely powerful sword. Thanks to her novel knowledge, she knows it's the legendary Flamberge's Wrath, a divine weapon of fire. His family is currently disguising this absolute powerhouse as a basic magic sword. They had to hide it because the paranoid emperor strictly forbids them from hoarding divine weapons. So they engineered the ballroom drama as the perfect smokescreen. Titania points out that her past self was dumb enough to just throw a jealous tantrum over the dance without seeing the bigger picture. But now she fully understands how his brilliant mind operates. Faking a dramatic sniffle, she playfully acts heartbroken that he drew his sword on her after she prepared such a perfect gift. She wipes an imaginary tear, putting on an absolute Oscar-worthy performance. Completely thrown off by her flawless logic, Raymond sheathes his sword and apologizes, admitting this new version of her feels totally fake. He urgently demands to know who on earth managed to fix her toxic personality. Titania casually jokes that he can go ask the giant tree she fell out of. She leans on her hand, claiming her brain just rewired itself after she slammed her head into a branch. Internally, she's sweating, knowing she can't exactly admit she literally died and reincarnated. She desperately wishes she could just tell him she read a prophecy book that said he'd ruin her life, but forces herself to keep smiling instead. Raymond quickly connects the dots, realizing she's using this massive secret as leverage against his family. He figures out she's cornering him into a high-stakes deal. His intense gaze locks onto her as he coldly asks what her price is. Titania casually waves it off, saying she won't ask for anything too crazy right out of the gate. She gestures to the palace grounds, pointing out that her current servants are completely useless and didn't even care when she was severely injured. So her first demand is simple: she wants a fiercely loyal escort knight and a personal maid. But not just any staff, she specifically requests absolute units who are equally capable of saving a life as they are taking one. Raymond's aide is absolutely losing his mind in the background. He practically yells, wondering if the tree she hit her head on was some kind of legendary world tree, because her total personality flip is insane. Even Raymond rubs his head, completely struggling to process her new vibe. He stares at her calm, calculating face, wondering if this is all just an elaborate, manipulative act. His aide even whispers that maybe an imposter magically stole the princess's face. But Raymond shuts that down immediately, knowing the imperial family's divine blessing would instantly vaporize any dark sorcery. Titania leans in, confidently stating that since they both hold massive leverage over each other, their fake engagement is the perfect political cover. She smiles, suggesting they drop the hostility and form a mutually beneficial alliance. Raymond flashes back to her desperate, sobbing fits from the past, completely confused on whether those obsessive tears were ever real. But Titania hits him with the ultimate curveball, flashing a stunningly bright smile. She tells him not to worry because she has absolutely zero romantic interest in him anymore. The aide practically chokes on air, completely flabbergasted by the sudden rejection. Raymond stays stoic, stating he needs to consult his father before agreeing to an alliance this massive. Out of nowhere, Titania picks up a delicate teacup and absolutely shatters it on the ground, sending porcelain flying everywhere. As Raymond flinches, she casually whispers a quick warning. She proudly declares she's about to act like an absolute menace in public to keep up her old reputation. On cue, she starts screaming her lungs out, acting completely unhinged to trick the staff outside. The two two-faced maids burst into the room, totally panicking at the chaos. Internally, Titania is having the time of her life. She realizes that throwing a massive tantrum is actually incredibly therapeutic when she directs it at the people who screwed her over. Without hesitating, she absolutely yeets a heavy book right into the maid who gave her fake compliments earlier. She knows she looks like a total lunatic to outsiders. But she feels zero guilt, knowing not a single person in this palace ever cared enough to ask why she fell in the first place. In a flashback, we finally see the heartbreaking truth behind her accident. It wasn't just a clumsy mistake or a pathetic cry for attention from her fiancé. The original Titania desperately believed that if she was seriously hurt, her secluded birth mother would finally leave isolation to visit her. She knew a fake cold wouldn't be enough to draw her out of hiding. Trembling, she convinced herself that falling from the second floor wouldn't kill her, but it would finally earn her a shred of motherly affection. But as she stood near the edge, a cruel servant sneered at her, harshly asking what kind of trouble she was trying to cause now. Startled, she stepped back against the stone balcony railing, which instantly cracked under her weight. Thanks to the staff's malicious negligence, the rotten stone completely gave way, sending her plummeting. Titania glares at the maids, knowing their absolute failure to do their jobs is what actually sent a terrified child falling to her death. She silently tells them they should be incredibly grateful she's just breaking things instead of breaking them. Continuing her performance, she screams that Raymond called her too shabby, demanding the maids fix it. The terrified servants immediately grovel, begging her to calm down for her health. One of them frantically offers to fetch her some sweet cocoa to soothe her nerves. Titania narrows her eyes, knowing they usually restrict her diet, making her realize they likely received strict orders to purposefully trigger her bad temper with sugar crashes. Just then, a sharp knock echoes through the chaotic room. Titania smirks, knowing exactly who is behind the door, though she didn't expect her to arrive this fast. The doors open, and a woman glides in, putting on a sickly sweet performance about rushing over out of deep concern for the princess's health. It's the ultimate manipulator of the palace, the first imperial consort Cleo. Titania greets the first imperial consort Cleo, who puts on a sickly sweet performance. Cleo leans in, cooing over the supposedly pouting princess. But Titania physically shivers at her touch, knowing it's just a cold trap disguised as affection. In the original plot, Cleo planned to completely eliminate Titania the moment she gave birth to her own daughter. But after having the first prince, Cleo suffered complications and became infertile, so she pivoted to using Titania as a political pawn instead. Even this warm hug is just a toxic mind game, basically whispering that she's the only one who could ever love a broken princess. Playing right into her hands, Titania acts like an insecure kid, asking what if Raymond thinks she's ugly now. She puts on the puppy dog eyes flawlessly. Cleo, always the quick-witted manipulator, smoothly handles the situation. She knows the only reason Raymond actually showed up is because Titania finally did something unpredictable. She sweetly reassures the princess, claiming true love doesn't care about appearances. Internally, Titania is rolling her eyes. She knows Raymond literally fights in blood and dirt every day, so a few bandages wouldn't faze him at all. She realizes Cleo is just fishing for intel about her private chat with the Duke. Cleo pulls her into another fake hug, buttering her up by saying she's always looked flawless to her fiancé. She claims Raymond was probably just flustered seeing her so disheveled. Squeezing her hand, Cleo subtly reminds her how powerful and extraordinary the young Duke is. She then hits her with a soft scolding, saying she shouldn't have tested his patience. Titania nods, acting perfectly chastised. She realizes exactly why her past self was so blindly dependent on this wickedly manipulative woman. Playing the clueless victim, Titania asks how she can possibly make it up to him. Cleo takes the bait, suggesting a heartfelt gift, and conveniently brings up a rare sword she recently acquired. Titania instantly gets a bad feeling about this. Cleo brightly introduces the weapon as the Burispasio, claiming it sounds incredibly noble. But Titania knows the lore. Burispasio is actually a completely botched ancient sword that tried to mix divine and demonic powers. Prolonged use literally rots the wielder's brain. In the novel, Cleo's own son used it and absolutely wrecked himself. Handing a demonic sword to the Castlines, the only family left wielding holy power, is a massive insult. It's basically telling the Duke's family to go drop dead. Titania figures Cleo actually doesn't know the sword is cursed and is just trying to use her to slip the duchy a bribe. Titania acts super humble, politely declining the dangerous gift. So Cleo immediately pivots to Plan B, asking the princess to do her a small favor. She asks Titania to attend the summer consecration festival in place of her son, Prince Brian. She phrases it like a sweet request, but it's totally a command. Titania instantly sees right through the scheme. Every year, royals are sent to the borders for this ritual. It's a grueling journey that takes over a month to complete. With the crown prince seat currently empty, Cleo doesn't want her precious son wasting time or risking beast attacks on the rough roads. The imperial family has 3 kids, Cleo's son Brian, the empress's son Adrian. And Titania, if Brian doesn't go, his rival Adrian gets the spotlight. To prevent that, Cleo is dumping the chore onto the politically useless princess. Plus, if Titania does a good job, Cleo will definitely force her to do the winter festival too. But internally, Titania is absolutely beaming. This is the ultimate jackpot. It's the perfect excuse to leave the palace, but she knows she has to play hard to get, so she acts terrified of the demonic beasts. Cleo hits her right in the weak spot, reminding her that Raymond fights beasts daily and would be so disappointed if she whined. Titania forces a nod, mentally rolling her eyes that this woman weaponizes Raymond for everything. Satisfied, Cleo promises to send a priest for her wounds and gracefully exits. The second the door shuts, Titania's face scrunches up in pure disgust at the consort's fake virtue. Completely drained, she kicks the maids out and collapses onto her massive bed. The summer festival is a solid escape plan, but she knows the winter festival is where the real danger lies. The whole point of these festivals is to reinforce the ancient barrier keeping the darkness at bay. According to myth, the imperial family used the power of light to command the other heroic families, purging the land of monsters. But as the centuries passed, the royals and heroes completely lost their magic, reducing the festival to a giant PR stunt. The castlines are the absolute only exception. By strictly preserving their bloodlines, they are the last ones standing who can still awaken true divine power. So the Summer Consecration Festival is really just a temporary band-aid to keep the barrier stable. But the Winter Consecration Festival in the north, that's the real hardcore boss fight. For the castlines, it's basically like being the sole leader of a massive group project while the rest of the empire totally ghosts them. Titania realizes if Cleo forces her to attend the Winter Festival too, she'd have to stay at the Duke's fiercely guarded northern estate for an entire week. Surrounded by people who absolutely despise her with zero allies, she'd rather drop dead. Back at the Duke's estate, the atmosphere is freezing cold. Raymond stands firmly before his father, the Duke, asking what their next move should be. The Duke, Cassian El Castellane, remains calm. He points out that Raymond personally rushed to the haunted iron mine just to verify the princess's wild story. He asks why Raymond didn't just report it first, wondering if he was afraid of his audacious fiancée lying again. Raymond plays it cool, claiming he just didn't want to cause massive confusion with a hasty, unverified judgment. But his father pierces right through him, asking if he actually just felt horribly guilty about how he treated the princess. The Duke knows Raymond has always dismissed Titania as a completely useless half-blood who would only drag his family down. He points out how badly it must have shaken him to realize she might actually have hidden depths and valuable intel. Raymond clenches his fist, stubbornly doubling down, stating he only ever makes choices that strictly benefit their family. His father sighs, reminding him that the abandoned mine belongs to the Bradley family, who are totally loyal to the Emperor. If Raymond had been caught snooping, he would have handed their enemies the ultimate excuse to attack them. Raymond finally bows his head, apologizing for his reckless move. The Duke studies his son's conflicted expression, realizing the princess must have looked incredibly different to him today. He can clearly see that his usually stone-cold successor is completely rattled. Cassian feels a pang of guilt. He knows Raymond carries a brutally heavy burden that he never wanted to pass down. Raymond has always perfectly ignored every temptation, including his own fiancée, just to flawlessly execute his duties as the future Duke. Meanwhile, Raymond's younger brother, Lysianthus, bursts into the room, totally hyped about the insignia of Gloriana. But the youngest brother, Rasper, is highly skeptical, wondering if the mad princess is just pulling another massive, elaborate prank. The Duke knows that if he just orders Raymond to forget about it, his loyal son will bury his confusing feelings and move on like a machine. But instead, Cassian slides a sealed letter across the desk, deciding to give Raymond a chance to figure things out for himself. Raymond looks relieved, genuinely thanking his father for the opportunity. Cassian watches him leave, deeply loving his son but ultimately prioritizing his cold duty to the family. He resents that his bloodline has to constantly support the completely incompetent, irresponsible imperial family. He admits he had to sacrifice his own true love for this duty, which is why he desperately wanted Raymond to marry someone safe. Someone he wouldn't have to sacrifice himself for, and definitely not the chaotic daughter of their greatest enemy. But a true Castellane never forgets a favor or a grudge, so he wonders how Raymond will handle this lingering regret. Back at the Rose Palace, Titania is genuinely impressed by how ridiculously fast consort Cleo moves. She already sent a priest to heal her wounds, clearly trying to force Titania's hand into accepting the festival deal. But Cleo wasn't the only one who fast-tracked their plans. Suddenly, a tree branch pokes Titania's cheek. She opens her eyes to see a fiery red-haired guy casually leaning over her. The Duke actually accepted her demand for an escort night. But she is absolutely horrified when she realizes he sent Lysianthus, the absolute mad dog of the Castline family. While Raymond is upright and cold and Rasper is a quiet scholar, Lysianthus is famously known as a total good-for-nothing menace. Titania realizes that if the duchy wanted to hide their new divine sword through high society gossip, having Lysianthus dance with a noble lady would have made way more sense. Since he doesn't have a fiancée, it would have been a totally clean distraction. But instead, they forced Raymond to take the heat. Why? Because Lysianthus's reputation is completely in the gutter. She remembers hearing wild rumors about him literally burning down banquet tables and constantly causing massive public scenes. Even as a totally isolated outcast, Titania couldn't escape hearing stories about his famously fiery temper. He's basically a walking disaster zone. Once his strict father stopped trying to control him, Lysianthus just started running absolutely wild. The only person in the world he actually respects is his older brother, Raymond. So while Raymond always coldly ignored Titania, Lysianthus went out of his way to aggressively provoke her for not being good enough for his brother. He ruthlessly spat insults at her that everyone else was too scared to say out loud. Even the emperor completely ignored his bullying, just telling Titania to quietly endure it like an easy target. Titania sighs, lamenting her pitiful past life as the palace punching bag. She glares at Lysianthus, completely certain he specifically grabbed that branch from the exact tree she fell out of just to viciously mock her trauma. Titania decides to just ignore the mad dog and happily focuses on her anger-calming dessert set. She spots a chocolate donut, completely tuning out Lysianthus as he aggressively asks if her ears are clogged. He glares at her, totally annoyed by her blatant disrespect. A wicked smirk creeps onto his face as he decides to up the ante. Suddenly, he snaps his fingers, and his wooden stick instantly erupts into a massive, roaring flame. Titania absolutely panics, screaming that he's a crazy bastard for playing with fire indoors. Lysianthus just laughs, smugly saying it's pretty hard to ignore him when it gets this hot. Titania tries to lecture him, but he casually shrugs, acting like holding a literal fireball in a fancy drawing room is totally normal. She glares at him, internally screaming at the Duke for sending a pyromaniac as her loyal bodyguard. But then she takes a deep breath, reminding herself that he's basically just an edgy middle schooler and she needs to be the bigger person. She grips her teacup, telling herself this is just bad karma from her past life. She repeats a mental mantra, trying her absolute hardest not to snap at him. Lysianthus sees her trying to stay calm and threatens to literally burn the entire palace down so they can play outside instead. Titania's patience instantly snaps. Without hesitating, she completely douses his fiery branch with a cup of tea. Steam hisses into the air as she coldly tells him that a joke is only funny when you know when to stop. Lysianthus totally short-circuits, completely baffled as to why his magic fire just went out. Titania deadpans that pouring water on fire obviously puts it out. She scolds him like a toddler, saying if anyone saw this, they'd think the great Castline family lacked basic common sense. She sighs, complaining that hosting annoying guests while she's still injured is exhausting. She fake pouts, teasing him about how terrifying a massive fire in the historic palace would be, making him sweat bullets. Lysianthus stammers, completely thrown off by her sudden switch to polite, manipulative teasing. Titania knows that in the original novel, when his sister was threatened, his family told him to stop holding back, and he literally set the imperial palace on fire. Looking at him now, she realizes that if he can control such strong flames at his young age, he must have already gone through his magical awakening. In this world, the power of fire has 3 stages: red, white, and finally the ultimate blue flame. Once it reaches blue, it becomes almost impossible to neutralize. She sips her tea, wondering how a supposed good-for-nothing possesses such insane power. Lysianthus awkwardly tries to steer the conversation back on track, nervously asking if the Duke sent him here just to check if she had really gone mad. Titania smirks, playfully accusing him of running a test to see how fast the palace would burn down. Frustrated, Lysianthus tosses the burnt stick onto the table. He rubs his head, admitting he only came because his father gave him a specific task. He pulls out a sealed letter and hands it to her, saying it's directly from the Duke. Inside, Titania finds an absolute treasure trove: a VIP pass to a top-secret intelligence tavern, a knight's emblem, and a poison-detecting ring. But the most important item is a handwritten note directly from the Duke himself. Titania quickly connects the dots. The VIP card gives her massive information power. The badge promises a proper, loyal knight will replace this crazy pyromaniac soon. And the ring guarantees they will send an expert in poisons and medicine to protect her. She notes that the worn condition of the badge and ring confirms her theory. The Duke wouldn't send such meaningful, personal items for no reason. Reading his note, she realizes the Duke is promising to carefully watch over her from now on. Lysianthus nosily asks what the letter says, but she quickly shuts him down, saying it's above his pay grade. She taps the VIP card, asking if there's anything else he needs to tell her. She asks when her real helper will arrive and if the card covers the tavern's hefty commission fee. Lysianthus looks genuinely surprised by her sharp questions, explaining that they'll contact her within a week and yes, the fee is covered. Titania smiles, deeply satisfied with the trade. She knows that since she doesn't have divine power, trying to keep the insignia of Gloriana would just make her a massive target for the Emperor anyway. The current royal family desperately tries to sweep the history of divine power under the rug, calling it a complete myth. If any royal actually awakened the power of light right now, the current rulers would instantly lose all their legitimacy. If that happened, Titania knows her head would be the first on the chopping block. She sighs, knowing that even though any royal theoretically can awaken, she's way too old for it to happen now. She figured giving the insignia to the Duke to reinforce the barrier was her safest bet. She smiles warmly, asking Lysianthus to tell his father that she is truly, deeply grateful for his support. Lysianthus flinches, completely stunned by her genuine smile as he remembers his father's strict order to quietly observe the princess. Just before Lysianthus left for the palace, he stood before his father, the Duke, totally confused. He asked what task his older brother Raymond was supposed to do. Lysianthus complained about having to play delivery boy for the wretched princess, crushing the envelope in his hand. He argued there was no need for him to go since she's technically his brother's fiancée. The Duke calmly mentioned that Raymond was deeply shaken after his meeting with Titania, completely shocking Lysianthus. To Lysianthus, his older brother is an absolute legend, the proud, unflappable successor of their family. The only reason Lysianthus felt comfortable acting like a complete menace was because his older brother was so ridiculously capable of handling everything. He knew he always fell short compared to Raymond, but he never actually resented him for it. In fact, he deeply admired him, viewing him as a perfectly strong shield for their family. Lysianthus absolutely hates complicated politics and shady backdoor deals, so he gladly left all that to Raymond. But the one thing he couldn't stand was the fact that a totally useless, abandoned princess was engaged to his perfect brother. To him, Titania was nothing but an annoying shackle. Whenever Raymond tried to do something important, like fake a scandal with another lady to hide a sword, Lysianthus even offered to take the hit and ruin his own reputation instead, just to protect his brother's perfect image. He scoffed that he didn't care about marriage anyway, pointing out that Raymond was already sacrificing way too much for their family. But Raymond firmly rejected the offer, stubbornly declaring that until the annulment is signed, Titania is strictly his responsibility. Lysianthus grinded his teeth, furious that his brother felt so much guilt toward a girl he didn't even like. In a flashback to that fateful ballroom scene, Titania threw a massive fit, screaming at Lysianthus about why he showed up instead of Raymond. Lysianthus was absolutely enraged by her entitlement, deciding to brutally mock the hollow princess, who couldn't understand his brother's heavy burdens. He maliciously taunted her, asking if she was going to hit him while she glared at him with furious, teary eyes. Unable to take it, she lunged at him, but he easily shoved her back. She violently crashed to the floor, dropping her delicate accessories everywhere. Lysianthus just laughed, sarcastically asking if she dropped something. He glared down at her with a truly wicked smile, completely disgusted that such a pathetic girl dared to call herself his brother's partner. He coldly promised her that since no one else would put her in her place, he would personally make sure she broke the engagement herself. Snapping back to the present, Lysianthus stands in the Duke's office. His father tells him that if even the unflappable Raymond is shaken, he needs to go see for himself if the princess has truly changed. Lysianthus finally agrees, but stubbornly mutters that just because she survived a terrible fall doesn't magically make her a better person. He arrives at her room fully expecting her to be faking it, completely prepared for her to throw a massive tantrum the second he provokes her. But instead, she coldly ignored his insults, and when he summoned a massive fireball to scare her, she casually put it out with a single splash of tea. He is completely stunned by her calm, unbothered reaction, staring at her like she grew a second head. He finally breaks the silence, asking in disbelief if she is really Titania. Titania flashes a surprisingly serene, peaceful smile and tells him flat out, no, the old Titania is completely dead. She maintains her eerie smile, firmly stating that the old princess really did die from that fall. Lysianthus completely misinterprets her words, remembering the terrifying sight of her crumpled body after her fall. He assumes the trauma literally broke her mind, asking in sheer horror if he's basically talking to a ghost right now. In a frantic flashback, Lysianthus remembers getting absolutely wrecked by Raymond in a sparring match. He had tried to defend himself, swearing he didn't know he was doing something horrible to Titania. We see a terrifying memory of Titania completely covered in blood, crying in pure agony while clutching a glowing sword. Lysianthus desperately yelled at his brother that he had no idea the sword was secretly coated in poison. But Raymond completely shut him down, furiously pointing out that since the Empress gave it to him, he should have known it was a lethal trap. Raymond completely lost his cool, violently pinning Lysianthus and accusing him of wanting to destroy Titania just so he wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. He ruthlessly told his brother he was rotten to the core and would never earn his love if he pulled stunts like that. Lysianthus stood silently in the flames, deeply regretting how badly he screwed up. In the present, Lysianthus realizes his past actions were totally ridiculous. He had violently bullied a girl who had already lost everything just to vent his own misplaced anger. He realizes the real mastermind behind all the palace drama is probably just laughing in the shadows, while this foolish princess ruined herself over a guy. He clenches his jaw, remembering how pathetic she looked whenever she cried over Raymond. He quietly admits to himself that he found the whole situation deeply unpleasant, muttering that she really is a foolish woman. He recalls looking down at her bloody form, genuinely wondering how anyone could be so incredibly stupid. At the time, he actually screamed at her that his brother's life would be infinitely better if she had just never existed. The sharp click of a teacup snapping onto its saucer suddenly pulls him out of his dark memories. Titania calls his name, snapping him back to reality. He blinks, totally dazed, and asks if he's seeing an illusion because for a split second. She looked exactly like the broken, traumatized Titania from his memory, but now she's staring at him with calm, clear eyes. Brushing off his weird stare, Titania asks if the Duke had any other secret messages for her. Lysianthus quickly recovers his attitude, stubbornly asking if she thinks he just came here to play mailman. He instantly gets defensive, assuming she's going to whine about Raymond again, but Titania completely throws him off by asking if he'd like to act like a mad dog before he leaves. Titania smiles, knowing full well that everyone remembers how explosively toxic her relationship with Lysianthus used to be. For now, she absolutely needs to keep her secret alliance with the Duke under wraps. If the Emperor catches wine that she's buddying up with his political rivals, he'll definitely put a target on her back. But if it's the notorious, mad dog Lysianthus visiting her, nobody will suspect a thing because everyone fully expects them to be at each other's throats. Titania realizes the Duke is playing 4D chess, sending his wildest son specifically to maintain her horrible reputation. She genuinely thanks Lysianthus for the cover. Without missing a beat, she asks him for a light. Lysianthus blinks, totally confused. But he obliges, holding out his flaming branch. Titania immediately grabs it and absolutely sets her own curtains on fire. Lysianthus absolutely panics, while Titania laughs like a complete maniac, yelling that destroying things is the best. He frantically asks if she's trying to burn down her own palace. She casually shrugs, saying it's her house so she can do whatever she wants. Then she smirks, pointing out that he should actually care, because she's totally framing him as the arsonist. Lysianthus completely short-circuits, Titania sighs, calling him slow. She asks if he really still hasn't figured out why his genius father sent him here. The Duke explicitly sent him so they could cause massive, highly visible trouble together to throw off any suspicion. It's the perfect excuse to relieve some stress. Titania points at the spreading flames, revealing her true motive. Everyone in this palace, from the treasury to the head maid, has been aggressively embezzling her budget. She furiously declares she's going to make them spit out every single stolen cent. Watching the flames roar, she happily sighs that she's finally starting to feel better. Lysianthus looks at her like she's completely lost her mind. But Titania just points at her own face with a giant, cheeky grin. In reality, she's furious. She almost died when that rotten balcony broke and not a single staff member stepped up to fix it. The imperial family still treats her like absolute dirt, so she decides to take matters into her own hands. She immediately sprints outside with the flaming branch, ready to unleash absolute chaos. She enthusiastically sets the overgrown gardens ablaze, practically cheering as the fire spreads. She knows that 80% of her servants are spies for the consort, and the rest are just bitter outcasts. None of them ever cared for her. They actively stole her funds, replacing expensive flower seeds with cheap weeds just to pocket the difference. Since they never showed her an ounce of mercy, she refuses to show them any either. She stands triumphantly in the flames, ready to make them suffer just like she did. The palace staff absolutely loses their minds, screaming about the fire. When they see Lysianthus running out behind her, they instantly assume the notorious mad dog did it. Lysianthus tries to stop her, yelling at her to quit pulling dangerous stunts. He grabs her arm, genuinely asking if she has a death wish. But Titania just flashes a brilliant smile, assuring him she definitely plans to survive. She points out that since she literally just fell off a balcony a few days ago, absolutely no one will suspect the traumatized princess of setting the fire herself. She leans in close, whispering a secret request into his ear. She asks him to secretly tell the Duke to build a hidden exit when his family inevitably pays to rebuild her palace. Suddenly, the panicked maids rush toward them, screaming for the princess. Playing the perfect damsel in distress, Titania collapses to the ground, screaming that Lysianthus is a crazy bastard who tried to burn her alive just because she touched a stupid magic sword. The maids immediately dogpile him, absolutely furious that he dared to attack a royal on palace grounds. Lysianthus is completely dumbfounded for a second, but then he looks down and sees Titania shoot him a sly, knowing wink. He finally catches on to her brilliant, chaotic plan. Leaning fully into his mad dog persona, he starts aggressively yelling back, calling her a pathetic idiot for not being able to dodge his fire. As the Rose Palace spectacularly burns to the ground in the background, Titania mentally cheers, thrilled to see how perfectly they work together as good-for-nothings. The next morning, Titania wakes up in a temporary, surprisingly tidy room. Her master plan worked flawlessly. To avoid a massive scandal, the Emperor swept the whole arson incident under the rug and didn't even charge the Duke for the repairs. Titania sits up, incredibly satisfied with her handiwork. Now she just has to deal with the heavily wrapped, cursed demonic sword Cleo gave her. She curses the consort, knowing Cleo purposely gave it to her as a silent threat to keep her mouth shut during the upcoming consecration festival. It's basically a bribe and a warning all wrapped into one highly dangerous package. She paces the floor, knowing she absolutely has to get rid of this toxic weapon immediately. She stares at the heavily wrapped blade, weighing her options. She can't exactly pawn off a highly recognizable, cursed royal sword on the black market. She rubs the hilt, trying to formulate a safe plan. She knows the Duke will definitely fund the reconstruction of her palace. But she feels she's already pushed her luck by putting him in debt over the secret escape route. Asking him to quietly dispose of this sword too would be crossing a line. However, she realizes that the Castlines are the only family who might actually be able to properly handle a demonic weapon. And conveniently, she has the holy insignia of Gloriana as the perfect bargaining chip to sweeten the deal. Titania eyes the cursed sword Biraspasio. It's infamous for completely rotting its user's mind, but it also has the highly broken ability to perfectly see through any lies. She realizes that since she already secured the holy insignia of Gloriana, she can just use its divine light to completely suppress Biraspasio's demonic corruption. The plan is flawless, until she remembers that the hyper-observant first consort would instantly notice if the sword was missing. So she decides she absolutely has to test the holy insignia's power first before she commits to anything crazy. She pulls the glowing insignia from its wrapping, admiring its intricate, jeweled design. Honestly, it just looks like a fancy, expensive toy. She wonders if she should just toss it back to the Duke and save herself the massive headache. Suddenly, a glowing blue hologram pops up in the air, enthusiastically welcoming her with a little text emoticon. The interface cheerfully announces that the sword is ready for the master rite. Titania absolutely panics, completely baffled by the floating emojis. The system keeps talking to her, calling her contractor and throwing up cute text faces. It formally introduces itself, explaining that it was created with the help of the god of light, Balabog, specifically to guide her path. The hologram explains that right now, 50% of its insanely broken abilities are totally locked behind a firewall until she completely finishes the master rite. Titania breaks out in a cold sweat. Wasn't this supposed to be an ancient, terrifying divine weapon? Why does it sound like a relentlessly cheerful customer service rep? The system happily asks if she wants to perform the master rite right now, throwing up another cute little face. Titania aggressively refuses, screaming that there is absolutely zero way she's doing that. The system instantly pouts with a sad emoticon. The sword warns her that if she refuses the rite, she'll permanently be capped at using only 25% of its full power. Titania yells that she couldn't care less and demands to know why she's even the contractor in the first place. The cheerful hologram explains that it's simply because she's already officially registered in the system as Balabog's contractor, sealing the deal forever. It reveals that the Biraspasio curse is actually just its aggressive anti-theft firewall that activates when anyone without proper credentials tries to hold it for over 6 months. The sword explains that normally it only accepts a single master, but if someone legally marries the contractor, they get full access to the shared account. Titania practically rips her hair out. She realizes the sword is basically telling her she has to shamelessly flirt with Raymond so he can use the sword through their marriage. She imagines herself casually handing Raymond this legendary weapon as a massive, romantic wedding gift, completely cringing at the thought. But the sword cuts through her panic, suddenly flashing a serious red warning screen. It loudly announces their ultimate goal, destroying the creator of all demonic beasts currently sealed beneath the northern barrier. The system demands she destroy this ancient evil before it literally annihilates the entire world. Titania glares at it, telling it to speak plain English. The sword warns that the barrier protecting humanity is failing fast, begging her to use its power to save everyone before the evil god Chernobog resurrects. Titania immediately tries to yeet the sword across the room, furiously screaming that she never signed up for any of this. She reminds the stupid sword that in the original novel, the main characters handled the whole saving the world plotline perfectly fine without her. She just wants to survive palace politics. But then she suddenly remembers something crucial. A few days ago, while she was comatose from her fall, she had a super weird dream where a mysterious white blob asked if she wanted to make a contract. She clutches her head in absolute panic. Did she seriously just agree to save the entire world while she was sleep-talking? She frantically asks the sword when exactly this contract happened, but the system just flashes a cheeky emoticon, refusing to tell her because her security clearance is too low. Totally defeated, Titania asks what the master right actually entails. The cheerful interface explains that it's basically a massive virtual reality trial. If she beats it, she unlocks full admin privileges and complete authority over the god of light's power. Titania deadpans, wondering why an ancient god uses such ridiculously modern terminology. The sword explains that the trial will transport her consciousness into a hyper-realistic simulation of the very first contractor building the northern barrier. All she has to do is perfectly recreate the seal. But Titania instantly realizes a massive problem. That first contractor is literally the first emperor of the empire. She completely gives up on the spot, declaring she's just going to hand the sword over to the duke and let him deal with it. The system absolutely panics. It frantically reassures her that she doesn't have to face the boss fight alone, and she can totally party up with companions representing the five elements. Titania gives the sword a dead-eyed stare, reminding it that she has absolutely zero friends, companions, or family in this world. The system awkwardly stalls. She cuts to the chase, bluntly asking if she'll actually die if she fails this supposed virtual trial. The sword nervously admits she won't die. She'll just be permanently trapped in a completely comatose, vegetative state until she wins. Titania instantly slams the sword down, politely wishing it a good life before permanently closing the chat. The sword aggressively vibrates, desperately trying to sell her on its amazing navigation and mind-reading features. It promises it can read people's thoughts, track locations like a GPS, and even provide a full encyclopedia on every demonic beast's exact weakness. The system throws up starry emojis begging her to keep it around. Titania pauses, genuinely impressed. But she quickly realizes all those combat features would be infinitely more useful to the Castline family on the front lines than to her sitting in a palace. She admits to herself that the original story would have been a million times easier if the Duke's family had just found this completely overpowered cheat item first. But she also remembers that the novel had a perfectly happy ending without this weird sword ever showing up, so there's absolutely zero reason for her to risk a permanent coma to use it. She safely locks the insignia away in a sturdy chest. Her only goal is to wish the main characters a happy life and quietly exit the stage. Suddenly, a maid knocks on the door, formally announcing that the emperor has unexpectedly invited the princess to an exclusive evening banquet. Titania instantly gets suspicious. She wonders if her supposed father is just dragging her there to severely lecture her about the massive arson incident with Lysianthus. She looks down, her expression hardening. She knows perfectly well that if the emperor had ever actually bothered to warn or guide her in the past, her original personality wouldn't have become such a catastrophic mess. Titania stands before her mirror, realizing this is the first time she's officially meeting her family since waking up from her coma. She smiles, deciding that even though she doesn't know exactly what the emperor is planning, she can definitely spin this banquet into another massive political opportunity. She happily orders her maids to fetch her prettiest dress. As she enters the grand dining hall, her expression turns somber and perfectly polite. She takes in the lavish spread and the cold, unbothered faces of the royal family already seated. The emperor glares at her, immediately scolding her for being late. Titania bows respectfully, formally greeting His Majesty the Emperor. He instantly laughs, mocking her formal tone and asking if her sickness finally made her grow up. He waves it off, telling her to just call him father like she always does. Titania forces a bright smile, calling him father while internally cursing the irresponsible bastard. She glares at him from under her eyelashes, furious that he acts so sweet now even though he never once visited her while she was literally clinging to life. She takes her seat, noticing the Empress and her son, the second Prince Adrian, sitting quietly. She wonders why her father let her slide so easily when she arrived late. Until she realizes that the first prince hasn't even shown up yet. She figures that if the emperor scolded her, he'd have to severely punish his favorite son too, so he's just playing favorites. Titania quietly eats her food, exactly as she expected of this toxic family dynamic. She notices an empty chair at the table. Everyone knows her secluded, ill mother would never attend, yet the emperor always prepares a seat for her anyway. It's all a massive PR stunt just so he can look like a devoted, caring husband to the public. Consort Cleo suddenly leans over, smiling sweetly and saying she's glad the princess's face wasn't ruined by her illness. Cleo then smoothly pivots, dramatically mentioning she heard there was a major incident at the Rose Palace yesterday. Titania's eyes narrow, she realizes exactly how Cleo wants to play this. The consort is subtly reminding Titania of their secret deal, basically forcing her to bring up the consecration festival in front of the emperor. Titania sips her tea, noticing that the usually quiet second prince, Adrian, is intently watching the exchange. She wonders why he's been staring at her this whole time. She realizes that the original, highly volatile Titania would have already thrown a massive tantrum by now, so her quiet behavior is probably making everyone super suspicious. Knowing she has no choice, she softly clears her throat, preparing to put on an absolute masterclass performance. She suddenly bursts into tears, dramatically crying out to her father that Lysianthus viciously insulted her. She cries that he looked down on the entire imperial family, completely ruining the lovely tea she prepared with all her heart. The emperor's face instantly darkens. Titania clenches her fists, mentally forcing herself to think of the absolute saddest moment in her life to keep the tears flowing. Like the fact that she woke up in her second life locked on hardcore survival difficulty. She wails that Lysianthus called her palace pathetic and shabby, just like her. Tears stream down her face as she perfectly plays the role of the heartbroken, bullied princess. She knows the emperor could easily laugh off Lysianthus just insulting her or even setting a small fire. But calling the Rose Palace shabby is a direct, massive insult to an imperial facility. Since the emperor harbors a massive inferiority complex toward the powerful Castellane family, there is absolutely no way he'll let that slide. The emperor quickly tells her to stop crying, clearly uncomfortable. Titania dramatically hiccups, apologizing for being so lacking. Totally falling for her act, the emperor loudly declares they will completely rebuild her palace as grandly as possible, just to flex on the Castlanes. Titania internally groans, realizing he doesn't even have the guts to confront the duke directly, but she's still thrilled she's getting her palace rebuilt for free. She knows it's a win-win. The emperor gets to look generous and forgiving to the public. The empress smoothly chimes in, asking where the princess is supposed to stay during the long construction. Titania acts surprised, pretending she hadn't even thought of that. Consort Cleo instantly swoops in, perfectly on cue, suggesting Titania take over her son Brian's duties at the upcoming summer consecration festival. Cleo sweetly asks her to stay at her palace afterward, but Titania sees right through the sly fox's bargaining chip. Titania mentally smirks. If she has to leave the capital anyway, she might as well score some massive political points with the emperor while she's at it. She politely declines Cleo's offer, completely shutting down her manipulation in front of everyone. She turns to the emperor, acting incredibly humble, saying she's never done anything to help the imperial family like her brothers have. With a perfectly earnest expression, she officially begs to attend the festival in their place. The emperor completely bursts out laughing, absolutely thrilled by her noble offer. He praises her as a filial daughter, totally relieved that she just solved his massive political headache. Right now, the emperor has no official crown prince. If he sent one son to the festival, it would heavily skew the political balance between his rivaling wives. Titania watches his happy face, disgusted that he's perfectly fine sending his recently comatose daughter to the dangerous edge of the empire just to avoid a headache. Just then the grand doors swing open and the golden child, first Prince Brian, finally arrives. Cleo happily greets him. Titania narrows her eyes, realizing she only got her banquet invitation a moment ago, meaning Brian definitely had way more notice but purposely arrived late to make an entrance. Titania watches in complete disbelief as servants haul a massive, bleeding boar into the pristine dining hall. She wonders what kind of nerve Brian has to pull a stunt like this right in front of the emperor. Brian dramatically announces he personally hunted the beast to wish his father eternal health and longevity. He flashes a completely arrogant, showboating smile, soaking in the attention. Titania rolls her eyes as her father immediately praises Brian's bravery, completely ignoring the fact that he was incredibly late and literally threw a bloody carcass onto a dining table. The scent of raw blood hits her and she suddenly flinches. Cleo smoothly covers for her son, claiming he was just so eager to hunt that he rushed over straight from the forest. Brian eagerly brags about stabbing the boar himself, while Cleo proudly claps for her golden boy. Titania knows the Emperor strongly favors Brian strictly because of his own deep insecurity toward the Castline Duchy. Unlike the quiet Adrian or sickly Titania, Brian has a fiercely combative personality. But Titania completely sees through the act. Brian's swordsmanship is just a pathetic show to win Daddy's favor. She bets he didn't even catch that boar himself. The Emperor might delude himself into thinking Brian can rival the Castlines, but Titania smirks, knowing Brian probably couldn't even defeat a baby demonic beast. She sarcastically wonders if they're supposed to share a cozy drink with the bleeding carcass. Suddenly, the Empress silently stands up, her eyes completely devoid of emotion. Without a word, she coldly walks away from the table. Titania smirks, glad she isn't the only one finding this circus completely unbearable. Taking her cue, Titania respectfully excuses herself, claiming she needs to prepare for the consecration festival. The Emperor happily waves her off while Adrian quietly watches her leave. As Titania walks down the dark, quiet corridor back to her ruined palace, Adrian suddenly calls her name, stepping out from the shadows. He gives her a soft, almost pitying look, acknowledging it's been a long time since they spoke. With a surprisingly gentle smile, he asks if she'd like to join her big brother for some tea. Meanwhile, back at the Castline estate, Raymond is aggressively trying to do paperwork, but he can't stop thinking about Titania's sudden personality swap. He genuinely wonders if she ate something weird or if her near-death experience completely rewired her brain. Lysianthus totally crashes his office, kicking back and loudly wondering if he just hallucinated that the mad princess actually looked pretty today. He immediately panics, grabbing his head and asking Raymond to hit him, completely convinced he's the one who ate something weird. Raymond sighs, silently agreeing with him. Lysianthus argues that Raymond was actually the first one to act weird. He points out that Raymond completely freaked out over the Gloriana crest and instantly called their father, so why is he acting like Lysianthus is the crazy one now? Raymond tightly grips his pen, coldly telling his brother to drop it. He sternly warns Lysianthus that if he keeps distracting him, he won't finish his work, which means he won't be able to escort their beloved little sister, Bibai, to the imperial palace tomorrow. Lysianthus instantly snaps to attention, absolutely shocked that Raymond is taking Bibai into the snake den. Raymond defends his choice, saying Bibai begged him with a perfectly logical reason and even their strict father approved it. Lysianthus instantly melts, aggressively agreeing because their Bibai is obviously a genius. A flashback shows the tiny, fearless Bibai confidently approaching the terrifying Duke of Castline. She brought him sweet, handwritten letters and a special tea made from flowers she picked herself. Miraculously, that specific flower tea actually ended up perfectly soothing the Duke's chronic pain from his old war wounds. But above all her talents, the Castlines absolutely adore Bibai because she genuinely cherishes everyone she meets, always returning kindness and wishing for everyone's happiness. Thanks to her pure, sunny energy, the historically cold and desolate Castline estate actually feels like a warm home now. Lysianthus proudly declares that Bibai is cute simply because she is Bibai. Raymond sighs, telling him to stop talking nonsense and get back to work. Lysianthus suddenly turns serious, asking if they'll be running into that lunatic tomorrow. Raymond strictly warns him not to use derogatory terms, reminding him they are officially just visiting an acquaintance on paper. Raymond knows the Imperial Palace won't closely inspect their companion list if they keep it low-key. Lysianthus smirks, realizing Bibai's secret field trip is completely off the books. He confidently assumes they won't see Titania at all, but notices Raymond completely hesitating. He narrows his eyes, asking why his older brother suddenly cares so much about the princess. Raymond stays quiet. Lysianthus sighs, admitting it makes sense since Raymond finally met her face-to-face and saw her dramatic transformation. He casually mentions he already read the full report on their little arson stunt. Raymond tightly grips his pen, secretly admitting to himself that he can't seem to forget Titania's face either. Back at the Imperial Palace, Titania sits across from Adrian in his private drawing room. He politely pours her tea, smoothly apologizing that he only asked for something sweet since he doesn't know much about tea leaves. He flashes a perfectly charming, warm smile. Titania stares at him, completely unbothered by his charm. She knows Adrian looks like the absolute picture-perfect prince from a fairy tale. But she also knows that despite his perfection, he is doomed to a deeply tragic fate just like her. Adrian is the legitimate son of the Empress. In any normal royal family, he would have smoothly become the crown prince without a single issue. But his greatest misfortune was being born directly into the bitter, toxic conflict between the Emperor and the Empress. The arrogant Emperor simply couldn't tolerate anyone being better than him, and unfortunately, the two people infinitely more competent than him were the Duke of Castline and his own wife, the Empress. The Empress hails from the ancient house of Integria, a family literally older than the empire itself. She was raised to be absolutely flawless, noble, and fiercely dignified. Once she was crowned, she saw absolutely zero reason to cater to her husband's petty, insecure whims. The emperor deeply resented her, but he couldn't openly persecute the legitimate mistress of the house. So to specifically break her spirit, he completely ignored her and blatantly favored Cleo, elevating the illegitimate child over her older sister. Titania thinks that if the emperor had actually fought for his throne, he wouldn't be this wildly irresponsible. But he was just handed the crown because he was the only son. His entire mindset is incredibly toxic. He fully intends to string both his sons along, forcing them to grovel for his favor until he arbitrarily decides who he likes more. This arrogant, petty game is exactly what sparks the massive, bloody succession war in the future of the novel. Yet despite the blatant disrespect, the Empress and Adrian maintain a perfectly calm, stoic stance. They refuse to play his dirty games, choosing to silently watch from the sidelines instead of begging for scraps. To the rest of the court, the Empress and Adrian just look like they're keeping a low profile to save face against the Emperor's blatant disrespect. But Titania knows the truth. They are actually just biding their time, waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike. They know the last one standing is the true winner. Adrian smiles warmly, asking how the tea is. Titania stares back quietly. She knows Adrian perfectly hides a terrifyingly sharp mind and swordsmanship that completely outclasses Brian's. He never wastes his time on useless things. So naturally, a troublemaking princess who was never even considered a threat shouldn't have caught his eye at all. At least not until her sudden personality change. She takes a sip of the tea and bluntly tells him it's bitter. Adrian acts surprised, innocently claiming he told the staff to add plenty of sugar. Titania immediately shoots back, saying she meant his probing gaze was bitter. She coldly calls out his fake hospitality, making it clear she won't be easily intimidated. Adrian's warm smile finally drops. The mask comes off, revealing his truly calculating, intense stare. Getting straight to the point, Titania demands to know why he asked to see her in private. She sarcastically asks if he actually brought her here just to offer empty condolences about her illness. She bluntly asks if he suddenly wants to play the role of the kind, caring older brother. She smirks, heavily implying that someone as smart as him wouldn't do something so foolish. Adrian finally smirks back, thoroughly impressed by her sharp tongue. He smoothly agrees, saying he definitely won't offer empty apologies or pretend to be her sweet big brother from now on. He stares at her with a completely unreadable expression. Then he laughs, genuinely amused. He admits he always thought she was just an immature child, but clearly he was wrong. Titania cuts right to the core of the issue. She points out that Adrian never reached out to her in the past because he didn't want to mess with consort Cleo's favorite pawn and put himself in the crossfire. He scratches his head, casually agreeing that she certainly has a sharp tongue now. Titania glares at him, mentally calling him a huge hypocrite for pretending to be so innocent now. In the original novel, Adrian was literally described as a snake. He's the kind of guy who patiently waits in the shadows for his opponent to let their guard down, and at the very last second, he completely cuts their throat to emerge victorious. Refusing to play his games, Titania casually mentions that consort Cleo seemed awfully happy earlier when she volunteered for the consecration festival. Adrian's eyes narrow slightly. He admits he was surprised she volunteered for such a grueling, unpleasant event, smoothly asking if she thinks it will be dangerous. Titania bluntly states that since she doesn't even have a proper escort knight, and there's absolutely zero chance her own mother will go with her. She asks if Prince Adrian is planning to go with her instead. He flashes a brilliant, knowing smile, softly saying he will if that's what she wants. Titania completely sees through him, sharply asking if she really looks that foolish to him. She knows his sweet talk is completely fake, specifically designed to serve his own hidden agenda. If she formally brings Adrian into the festival, he can finally sneak into the highly politicized event, something Cleo has actively blocked him from doing for years. But in return for helping him, Titania would definitely incur Cleo's absolute terrifying wrath. And if that happened, would the snake Adrian actually stand up and protect her from the first consort? Absolutely not. He has zero intention of fully taking her side. He's just using her as a convenient stepping stone while pretending to worry about her safety. Titania coldly asks if he knows how many people actually came to visit her when she was literally on the verge of death. She answers her own question, absolutely no one. She tells him flat out that it's a bit too late to start playing the role of the worried older brother now. She asks if he thinks she should be grateful he's finally reaching out just because he's the legitimate son of the Empress. Titania glares at him, reminding him that just like he never considered Brian his true brother, he never once thought of her as his sister either. Adrian's grip tightly tightens on his teacup. He is silently infuriated, knowing perfectly well how deeply starved for affection the old Titania used to be. In a tragic flashback, we see the original Titania completely ruined and abandoned in a dark, shattered cell, because absolutely no one ever reached out to help her. Titania coldly calls him out, furious that he didn't care when she was facing death as a lonely princess. But the second she became a useful political pawn, he suddenly found his compassion. Adrian finally drops the act, sincerely apologizing to her. He admits she's completely right. He only became interested in her after seeing her surprisingly clever actions at the banquet today. He admits it's ridiculous for him to suddenly claim the title of her older brother now. But he defends his past actions, explaining that since his mother's position is so precarious, he had to be incredibly cautious and couldn't risk associating with her. Titania aggressively glares at him, bluntly stating that it just sounds like a pathetic excuse. Adrian laughs nervously, realizing she is absolutely relentless. He leans in, making his final pitch. He asks if choosing him isn't inherently better than siding with Cleo, who is openly and blatantly trying to use her. He warns her that since she proved how incredibly clever she is today, she definitely shouldn't make an enemy out of him either. In a flashback to earlier that evening, Adrian is seen privately speaking with his mother, the Empress, asking if there's really a need to go to such lengths to recruit the princess. The Empress stares out the window, reminding him that Cleo has invested heavy effort into Titania. If they carelessly touch her pawn and get caught, it will cause massive problems. She reminds Adrian of a harsh truth she taught him long ago: the people of the Imperial Palace are worse than beasts in human skin. A flashback shows the Empress remembering her own father, the powerful head of House Integria, confirming her cynical worldview. The Empress coldly explains that the palace nobles are completely incompetent, only caring about saving face while committing vulgar, backstabbing acts behind everyone's backs. And the Emperor is absolutely no different. In her youth, the Empress genuinely tried to understand her arrogant husband, even bowing her head when she wasn't wrong. But once he began blatantly favoring Cleo just to spite her, his attitude became unbearable. The final straw was when the Emperor began openly looking down on her prestigious father, completely disrespecting her family's ancient legacy. The Empress remembers how the Emperor repeatedly insulted and ridiculed her prestigious Marquisate of Integria just to break her down. He even forced her deeply respected father to kneel over something totally trivial. At that exact moment, the Empress completely lost all faith in her husband. Instead of fighting a petty war, she vowed to raise her son, Adrian, more preciously than anyone else in the entire empire. She wanted him to be fundamentally different from his pathetic father. She was fully prepared to stain her own hands with absolute disgrace just to protect him. Because of her intense, protective focus on her son, turning a blind eye to the bullied Princess Titania was incredibly easy for her. It was especially easy since Titania's own parents had already completely abandoned her. Adrian gently holds her hand, softly saying he knows she did it all for him, but he can see the heavy guilt weighing her down. He points out that she's secretly grieving because her ruthless political choices are making her act just like the emperor she hates. Adrian suggests that by helping Titania now, they can at least reclaim a shred of their humanity. He admits to his mother that his heart completely sank the moment he saw Titania at the banquet today. He saw exactly what she was doing, pretending not to know things when she did, acting foolish and gambling with her life like she was walking a razor-thin tightrope, all while forcing a fake smile. He confesses that watching her desperately manipulate the room to survive felt exactly like looking into a mirror. He acknowledges that while he at least had a fiercely protective mother, Titania has absolutely no one in her corner. The Empress silently agrees. Seeing the fragile princess standing all alone, desperately fighting to survive, made her feel incredibly guilty, even though she knows she's being a massive hypocrite now. She tightly hugs Adrian, assuring him she'll be fine and isn't weak enough to let a little guilt put them in danger. She notes that after watching Titania's brilliant performance today, the princess is clearly much cleverer than they originally thought. Meanwhile, Titania is totally exhausted, poring over ancient texts in the Imperial Library. She sighs, frustrated that she can't find any useful information. She came all this way just to research the weird, emoticon-using demonic sword. The system pops up, aggressively crying that it's not a demonic sword, but she just ignores it. She rubs her temples, overwhelmed by how insanely complicated her life has gotten lately. First, a glowing sword demands she sign a contract to save the world. And then Prince Adrian out of nowhere proposes a dangerous alliance. She admits she finally agreed to a temporary truce with him because he wasn't entirely wrong. She can't keep playing dumb in front of Cleo forever. Since she doesn't have the power to face the first consort head-on, choosing Adrian was her only real option. At least he still has a slight conscience. She sighs heavily, genuinely hoping she didn't just make a massive, fatal mistake by trusting the snake. Walking down the bright palace corridor, she clutches the single ancient book she managed to find. She grabbed it because it briefly mentioned Gloriana, but it's so incredibly wordy she isn't sure it'll actually help her. Suddenly, she stops dead in her tracks. Hiding behind a pillar, she spots a familiar, tiny figure sneaking around the palace grounds. She absolutely panics when she realizes it's Bibai, and she's heading straight toward the Forbidden Maze garden. In the center of that maze lies a highly dangerous, sealed demonic beast. Back during the first emperor's reign, the palace wasn't safe, so they actually tamed demonic beasts using the power of light and let them roam loose as security guard dogs. But now that the modern royals have lost their divine magic, the remaining beasts are completely uncontrollable. Fortunately, they only spawn deep in the underground labyrinth, so they're totally harmless unless someone is foolish enough to wander down there. Very few people even know the underground area exists, let alone how to access it, so it's never been a real issue. But Titania frantically wonders where the heck Raymond and Lysianthus are, and why their precious little sister is wandering around a lethal trap all alone. Despite knowing it's incredibly dangerous, Titania ends up chasing after the energetic, tomboyish Bibai. Titania slowly creeps into the dark, eerie underground labyrinth. She heard the entrance was unusual, but she didn't expect a literal trapdoor to open so suddenly. She shivers, admitting the sudden drop scared her to death. But more importantly, she has completely lost track of Bibai in the darkness. After wandering for a bit, Titania finally figures out the maze's tricky layout. Even if she hits dead ends, as long as she keeps moving forward, every path eventually funnels straight to the center. And the only exit back to the surface is located right in that center room. But there's a massive, terrifying problem. The monstrous master of the maze is waiting right there. Titania freezes, seriously debating if she should just turn around and save herself. Her heart pounds as she questions why she should even risk her life for Bibai. After all, who is she to the protagonist? Does she really have to play the hero just because the world will supposedly fall apart without Bibai? She knows there's absolutely zero guarantee the beast won't attack her, since the royals only falsely assumed they were safe due to their lost divine magic. She desperately asks herself if she really wants to die in vain trying to save someone else again, referencing her tragic past life. She trembles, knowing that if she dies down here, absolutely no one in this palace will even mourn her. But then she violently punches the stone wall, absolutely furious with herself for hesitating. She firmly reminds herself that Bibai is just a child. A tiny 7-year-old child who just went through a terrifying regression and is struggling with all her might to survive. Titania tells herself that she might be the villainess who originally tried to poison Bibai. But she also knows that Bibai is finally, just now, starting to find real happiness after struggling so incredibly hard. Titania's eyes fill with absolute determination. She declares it would be way too miserable for Bibai's story to end in this dark, lonely dungeon. She refuses to just leave her behind. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoes through the dark tunnels. Titania immediately sprints toward the sound, frantically yelling Bibai's name. She bursts into the center chamber, instantly freezing in absolute horror. A massive, terrifying, wolf-like demonic beast is furiously growling, completely cornering tiny Bibai. Bibai is totally paralyzed with fear, tears streaming down her face as the massive monster prepares to strike. Without hesitating for a single second, Titania violently hurls her heavy book right at the beast's head. It smacks the monster, drawing its furious, glowing yellow eyes straight toward her. She boldly screams at it, calling it an ugly demonic beast. Titania pants heavily, terrified but standing her ground. Bibai looks over, completely shocked to see the notoriously mean Princess Titania standing there. The massive beast violently snarls, instantly abandoning Bibai and lunging straight for Titania, ready to tear her apart. The massive beast growls, locking its glowing eyes entirely on Titania. She realizes with absolute horror that it's looking at her completely differently than it looked at Bibai. The wolf lunges forward, and Titania frantically shoves Bibai out of the way. As the monster bears down on her, Titania finally puts the pieces together. The beast isn't just randomly attacking. It is specifically targeting her because of the holy insignia she recently touched. Grabbing Bibai's hand, Titania turns and absolutely sprints down the dark corridor. She forces her weak body to run as fast as she can, dragging the terrified child behind her while the massive wolf chases them down. Suddenly, a giant shadow completely engulfs them. Titania gasps as the beast cuts them off. She desperately shields Bibai with her own body, screaming in terror as the monster attacks. Blood completely splatters across the stone wall as the beast's claws tear into Titania. Bibai watches in absolute shock as the princess collapses. Titania painfully gasps for air, bleeding heavily onto the cold stone floor while the beast slowly approaches. The wolf's glowing yellow eyes lock onto its prey and it lunges for the final kill. Titania screams, bracing for the absolute worst. But instead of dying, she gently smiles at Bibai, weakly shushing her and promising she's okay. She softly asks if the little girl is hurt anywhere. Bibai is completely horrified, sobbing uncontrollably and begging the princess to stop talking because she's going to die at this rate. Titania forces a reassuring smile, telling her that help will definitely arrive soon, so she needs to be brave and stop crying. Bibai desperately tries to stop the bleeding, hysterically begging Titania to just leave her behind and save herself. Titania gently ignores her pleas, softly asking if she's the new lady of the Castline family. Bibai tearfully confirms her name is Bibai Luthinel Castline. Titania smiles, genuinely telling her it's a very pretty name. In a flashback, Titania remembers exactly what happened to this poor child in the original novel. Bibai was completely abandoned, horribly abused, and even tortured after being sold off. But looking at the little girl now, even though she's completely covered in blood and sweat, Titania can clearly see how much love and care she has finally received from her new family. The Castline Duchy has surrounded her with warmth, completely dedicated to ensuring their precious young lady walks an easy path, eats delicious food, and only sees beautiful things. Bibai finally has people who deeply care for her, constantly wishing for her happiness. Titania wipes a tear from Bibai's eyes, softly telling her she's okay. With a painfully gentle smile, she promises that no matter what happens, she will make absolutely sure to send Bibai back to the people who truly love her. Titania knows the ultimate plot twist of the original novel. Bibai, the beloved regressor protagonist, isn't just an adopted orphan. She is actually the biological child of the Duke of Castline's sister. But tragically, in her first life, the ducal family never found her, leaving her to rot in a terrible orphanage. She grew up with an incredibly abusive adoptive father. And in the end, she was sold to a totally unhinged mage, suffering horribly as a test subject before meeting a miserable end. Her entire first life was filled with nothing but pure pain and absolute despair. But after her regression, things completely changed. She got a miraculous second chance at life. In this timeline, she proudly entered the Castline family as their adopted daughter. Without any hesitation, the tiny, brave girl approached the terrifying Duke first. Through her pure kindness, she won their absolute trust and completely melted their cold hearts. She finally found genuine warmth, living a beautiful life overflowing with loves. But on the other hand, Titania looks at her own tragic fate. She knows that even if she dies right here in this dark dungeon, absolutely no one in the entire world will genuinely mourn her. But surprisingly, Titania smiles. She thinks to herself that she's really, truly okay with that. In a deeply emotional flashback, Titania remembers her past life before she reincarnated. Her loving parents are holding her close, calling her their proud daughter and promising they are always on her side. They lovingly tell her not to have any regrets and to confidently walk the path she truly believes is right. They assure her that mom and dad will always, always be right behind her. Bringing her focus back to the bleeding, terrified child in her arms, Titania fiercely decides that she wants Bibai to experience a beautiful life of being loved, just like she did in her past life. She weakly asks Bibai to pass a crucial message to her mother. She reveals that the second consort is actually secretly taking poison, painfully enduring a fake, chronic illness, specifically to protect Titania from the Emperor's political games. Titania knows her mother is just desperately trying to hold on until the princess finally becomes a legal adult. She realizes she never once resented her mother for being trapped in this toxic palace. Just by staying alive and watching over her from the shadows, her mother did more than enough. Remembering her own warm, loving parents from her past life, she knows that not all families can openly love each other, but the protective bond is still there. Tears finally stream down Titania's face as she begs Bibai to do her this one massive favor. She desperately asks the little girl to tell her mother that she can finally be at peace now, completely free from her heavy burden. With a breathtaking, truly genuine smile, she makes her final, heartbreaking request. She asks Bibai to tell her mother she's okay and that young Duke Raymond will finally be at peace too. Bibai frantically cries out for her sister. Titania's eyes slowly close. She morbidly thinks to herself that if this forced engagement simply ends with the tragic death of the fiancé, then Raymond won't even have to fight for an annulment anymore. As she bleeds out on the cold stone floor, she peacefully thinks that if she had known it would end like this, she wouldn't have worried so much about the future. She takes a final shallow breath, ready to close her eyes for good. As Titania fades, she genuinely believes that her death will finally set her suffering mother free from this toxic palace. And Raymond, who is forever bound by their unwanted engagement, will finally be at peace along with the rest of the Castline family. She imagines Adrian might miss her sharp tongue a little, but he definitely won't be too sad. Suddenly, a glowing book materializes in the dark space around her. The book quietly whispers, wondering if it would have been better for everyone if she had just never been born. Titania's eyes snap open, she firmly denies it. She remembers the warm, loving hands of her parents from her past life. And she remembers holding little Bibi, fiercely determined not to let the tiny lifesaver go without repaying her kindness. In a flashback, Titania stands between Bibi and the massive demonic beast, bravely declaring that she is the daughter of the House of Castline. Titania fiercely hugs the terrified child, swearing that her family never forgets a favor or a revenge and they always pay their debts. Back in the void, Titania furiously declares that absolutely no one in this world deserves to die like this. She remembers her lovely, resilient Bibi, who never gave up despite her horrific first life. Titania realizes that Bibi's absolute strength is exactly why she is the true protagonist. Hearing her resolve, the glowing presence softly asks her what she should do next. Titania just smiles and politely thanks it. Suddenly, Bibi's panicked voice completely shatters the illusion. She frantically screams for Titania to wake up and not close her eyes. Titania gasps, realizing that her entire life literally just flashed before her eyes like a revolving lantern of memories. But right before she blacked out, she vividly remembers seeing an incredibly bright flash of light completely obliterate the massive demonic beast. Through the blinding light, she swears she saw Raymond's face looking down at her. He was completely covered in blood and dirt, gently holding her before she finally lost consciousness. Back in the strange, glowing void, the voice returns. It confirms she really did see Raymond breaking into the dungeon to save her. In a vision, she sees Raymond pulling both her and a hysterically sobbing Bibi into a tight, desperate hug. The voice softly calls out Princess Titania. A massive blue system window suddenly materializes, officially announcing that the Covenant of the Lord is activated. However, it also warns that since twilight is not yet ripe, it's too early for the veil of light to fully lift. But because she is the crucial candle wick of dawn, the system officially erases the death of contractor Titania. It immediately begins playing back all the forgotten memories from her very first world. A beautiful glowing spirit descends toward her, offering to grant her absolute deepest wish. The spirit asks if she wants to turn back time so she can become the ultimate emperor and brutally crush everyone who ever looked down on her. Or if she prefers, the spirit offers to magically rewrite Raymond's mind, completely forcing him to fall deeply in love with her. Titania quietly rejects both options. The spirit gently asks what will happen if she simply refuses to make a contract. It warns her that without a contract, she will be permanently erased from this world. Titania remembers how insanely envious her original self was, literally wanting to kill Bibi just to steal her place in the Castline family. But she finally admits that none of those dark, twisted desires were ever her true wish. All she ever really wanted was a proper family. She just desperately wanted to experience a parent's genuine, unconditional love. Tears freely stream down her face as she asks for one simple thing. She just wants to live her life again. But this time, she wants to live completely free, without being controlled or manipulated by anyone. She wants to blaze her own path, boldly moving in the right direction, far away from the toxic shadows of the imperial family. The glowing spirit pauses, noting that this is actually an incredibly difficult request. The moment she officially contracts with it, her existence in this specific world becomes permanently locked. Because of that strict rule, it absolutely cannot just instantly teleport her to new parents. And since it can't magically interfere with royals who aren't contractors, it can't fix her current terrible parents either. But the spirit offers a massive loophole. It promises to temporarily send her consciousness to an entirely different world for a while. In that new world, she will be born to wonderful, loving parents, receive a fantastic education, and be deeply loved to her heart's absolute content. Then, the exact moment she reaches her current age in that other world, she will instantly be pulled back into this original timeline. And to properly fulfill the covenant, she will wake up at a specific point in the past. The spirit gives her one final, serious warning. If they do this, the shock of crossing dimensions will likely scramble her memories, meaning she won't be exactly the same Titania she is right now. Titania confidently smiles through her tears, completely unbothered. She firmly declares she doesn't care if her memories get perfectly distorted. The spirit warmly accepts her answer, preparing to send her off. With one final prompt, it asks if she will officially make the contract. Titania softly whispers yes. As she begins to dissolve into pure, golden light, she realizes there is absolutely no need to blame the world or anyone else for her past misery anymore. She accepts that the only thing fundamentally wrong in her life was her own twisted mindset. She fully embraces this second chance to start over, desperate to finally learn how to properly love and be loved. She completely believes that if she can just achieve that, everything in her future will be infinitely better than it is now. As her consciousness finally fades away into the light, she closes her eyes, sincerely feeling sorry for all the pain she caused Raymond in the past. In the void, Titania softly whispers her apologies to Raymond, promising she will never again cause him pain. She vows to completely stop her shameless, obsessive love. The glowing system interface suddenly pings, announcing that the playback of her forgotten memories has finally ended. In the real world, someone frantically shouts that the princess has finally opened her eyes. Titania slowly blinks, staring blankly ahead. She groggily mutters that she feels like she just had a very long, incredibly important dream. The high priest and her new maids literally weep tears of joy, completely overwhelmed with relief. Titania weakly looks at them, awkwardly asking who they even are. Suddenly, tiny little Bibai launches herself onto the bed, tearfully screaming for her sister. Bibai cries uncontrollably, burying her face in the blankets and saying she was absolutely terrified Titania would never wake up. Titania gently pats Bibai's head, completely melting at how incredibly cute she is. Bibai sobs that if Titania had never opened her eyes, she definitely would have died of pure sadness. Titania smiles at her dramatic words but suddenly pauses. She wonders if there's a shockingly sharp edge to Bibai's words, strictly, because the little girl is actually a regressor who vividly remembers dying. The new maids frantically shush Bibai, begging her not to say such morbid things now that the princess is finally safe. Titania quietly observes how gently they treat the child. Looking around her fully furnished room, Titania realizes Bibai's massive influence. There are ultra-expensive magic tools regulating the temperature and repelling insects, top-tier caregivers, and a ridiculously luxurious bed. Selling just the furniture in this room could literally fund her old Rose Palace for 5 years. She also realizes that the highest-ranking priest in the empire was personally brought in to heal her, which explains why she feels surprisingly good despite getting absolutely shredded by a demonic beast. Meanwhile, in another opulent room in the palace, Raymond sits alone on the edge of his bed, looking utterly defeated. A flashback to earlier that day shows Raymond frantically trying to break into the emperor's private office. His aide desperately warned him that he couldn't cause a scene in the imperial palace. But Raymond completely ignored him. A royal guard blocked his path, yelling at him for daring to demand a private audience with the emperor. Raymond just coldly ordered him to move. The guard absolutely refused, furious at the young duke's insolence. Raymond glared back, calling the guard insolent for daring to block his path. With a terrifyingly intense stare, Raymond asked if this nobody really thought he had the authority to stop the future Lord of Castline. The guard physically flinched, completely overwhelmed by Raymond's heavy aura, but suddenly the massive office doors swung open. Raymond stepped inside, instantly kneeling before the highly annoyed emperor. The emperor scoffed, demanding to know the meaning of this blatant disrespect. Raymond completely ignored the pleasantries, coldly stating that a precious member of the Castline family had gone missing inside the palace walls, and he needed the emperor's official order to search the entire facility. The emperor laughed, sarcastically asking if Raymond mistook the imperial palace for his own personal backyard. The emperor sneered, calling Raymond just as lawless as his father. But Raymond sharply retorted that if the duke was truly lawless, he wouldn't have bothered asking for permission. He would have just violently torn the imperial palace down brick by brick to find the missing child. The emperor aggressively slammed his hand on his desk, internally cursing. He knew the Castlines cherished Bibai, so he intentionally delayed the search order specifically to gain a massive political advantage over the duke. He absolutely did not expect the stoic young duke to completely bare his fangs right in the middle of the palace. Raymond smoothly pointed out that if word spread that a guest went missing because the emperor refused to help, it would be a massive political nightmare for both of them. The emperor glared at Raymond, absolutely furious that a child still wet behind the ears was actively threatening him. But Raymond didn't blink, coldly reminding the emperor that no matter his age, he is still a Castline. He flashed his glowing golden eyes, warning the emperor that a Castline never allows what is rightfully theirs to be taken or threatened. Cornered, the emperor finally yielded. He angrily ordered his chief chamberlain to bring in the insolent man who delayed the search order. Suddenly, Prince Adrian stepped into the room. Raymond glared at him, asking what business the usually quiet second prince had with him. Adrian smirked, pointing out that Raymond should know better than anyone that causing a massive scene over a cast line would do him zero favors. He then casually dropped a massive bombshell. Princess Titania was also missing, and he had a very bad feeling about it. Adrian smoothly suggested that when Raymond searched the palace for his sister, he should probably look for the princess too. In the present, Raymond tightly grips his collar. He remembers brushing off Adrian's warning, thinking it was just a groundless, manipulative fear. He genuinely thought the anxiety gnawing at his chest was just a trick of the mind. He told himself over and over that Titania should never be the source of his worry. But then the horrifying memory flashes back, little Bibi desperately sobbing, begging him to save her sister. He remembers breaking into the underground labyrinth and finding Titania completely drenched in blood, shielding the crying child. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just worried about Bibi. He was utterly terrified that Titania was dead. He remembers pulling her limp, freezing cold body into his arms, absolutely horrified that he couldn't feel a pulse. He genuinely thought she was dead, the girl who always acted so noble, the one who screamed at him with such venom. Was she really just gone like that? But then a miracle happened. She weakly coughed, whispering that she was fine. Raymond stares at his trembling hands, remembering how she looked like she was drawing her absolute last breath. Yet even in that horrific state, she completely ignored her own massive wounds to worry about Bibi, a child she only just met today. And right before she passed out, the very last name on her lips wasn't her parents' or even his, despite her supposed obsessive love. Raymond covers his face, completely overwhelmed by the crushing guilt. He mutters her name, finally realizing she really is. Suddenly, the heavy doors to his room fly open. His aide bursts in, frantically shouting that the princess has finally awakened. In the blink of an eye, Raymond is standing in Titania's room. He quietly says her name, completely relieved to see her finally looking back at him. Raymond completely drops to his knees right by Titania's bed, looking absolutely exhausted but incredibly relieved. Titania totally panics, mentally screaming because the famously proud Duke is literally kneeling in front of her. She remembers from the original novel that this guy kept his back perfectly straight even when standing before the Emperor. He had never once knelt to anyone in the entire story. As a house possessing dignity equal to the imperial family itself, the Castlines absolutely do not bend their knees easily. The knees of the future head of the house basically hold a value equal to the dignity of the entire ducal family. So for him to just randomly drop to the floor in front of a completely baffled princess is an absolutely unbelievable sight, even for someone who knows the future. Titania awkwardly stares at him, mentally begging him to stop breaking character. Raymond looks up at her with totally sincere eyes, stating that he received an invaluable grace from her. Placing a hand over his heart, he formally declares that in the name of Castline, he expresses his deepest gratitude to the princess. He firmly states their family's code: a favor should be returned until both hands are overflowing, and revenge should actively continue until both feet stop. He looks her right in the eye, telling her that the grace he received from her today is so profound it completely defies measurement. He gently takes her hand and kisses the back of it, formally vowing that from this moment forth, the House of Castline will officially become her sword. Even if it means facing death itself, he promises they will absolutely not allow anyone to take her life. This intense, absolute loyalty is the unofficial family motto of the House of Castline. Titania's stomach completely drops. She feels incredibly strange and deeply uncomfortable. But before she can even respond, the scene cuts back to the dark underground labyrinth. Someone is standing in the shadows, coldly wondering where exactly the little girl got the secret intel about the maze. The shadowy figure notes that Bibi supposedly found a book in the Imperial Library of all places. They scoff, knowing a kid who never reads wouldn't just stumble upon top-secret information by pure chance. It's obviously a carefully planned scheme. The scene reveals its consort Cleo, sitting in her dimly lit room, questioning her loyal head maid, Mary. Cleo smirks, dangerously telling Mary that if she has a mouth, she better answer her. The maid sweats bullets, desperately stammering that Princess Titania is known for being totally slow-witted. Cleo's smile instantly vanishes. She violently slaps the maid right across the face. Cleo coldly glares down at the trembling maid, calling her incredibly foolish for assuming the princess doesn't know the value of her own life. The maid whimpers, desperately suggesting that maybe Titania was just blindly following her high-end mighty fiancé's orders. Cleo sighs, clearly disgusted. She admits she purposely picked moderately stupid fools to work at the Rose Palace, but Mary is far more useless than she thought. Cleo firmly points out that the only reason her spies could act so presumptuously until now was purely because Titania was an isolated outcast with no one to lean on. But now, Cleo realizes the princess's standing in the palace is about to radically change because of this incident. A flashback shows the Castline family pouring their absolute full strength into breaking into the dungeon to save Titania and Bibi. Raymond even violently took over the Empress's palace to find the closest entrance, and literally kidnapped the High Priest just to bring him directly to Titania's bedside. The Rose Palace servants were completely shut out, terrified as armed Castline knights aggressively guarded the princess's door. Cleo remembers the Emperor completely throwing a tantrum, furiously screaming at his underlings for not knowing the princess's whereabouts while the Duke tore through the palace. But she also remembers that while the Emperor was furious at the young Duke's rudeness, he was secretly incredibly interested in the grace the princess supposedly bestowed upon the powerful duchy. Cleo narrows her eyes, correctly guessing that the Emperor fully intended to use this entire incident to pass off Titania, who had been completely flawed by her injuries, straight onto the House of Castline to get rid of her. But now, because Titania actually saved the Duke's precious niece, the Emperor's entire petty plan has completely backfired. The maid aggressively bows, frantically apologizing for being so foolish. Cleo coldly stares at her, genuinely debating if it's finally time to get rid of this stupid maid permanently. She calculates that since the Rose Palace servants have already completely fallen out of the Emperor's favor, it might be a much smarter move to just eliminate Mary before anyone finds a reason to actually investigate her. But she realizes she has a much bigger problem right now, Titania. Cleo firmly believes it's way too coincidental to be mere chance. She genuinely wonders what kind of courage an arrogant, mouse-like girl had to literally throw her own body on the line, not even for her fiancé, but just for his newly adopted niece. She ponders how on earth Titania even discovered that Castline's hidden new family member had secretly visited the palace. And how did she manage to flawlessly lay a trap and perfectly throw her own body right into it? Cleo grips the armrest, her nails digging in, if absolutely everything was perfectly planned by Titania. She remembers the princess acting like a clueless, crying victim earlier that week. She genuinely questions if Titania is actually clever enough to flawlessly orchestrate all of this. Cleo finally shakes her head, deciding she's worrying over absolutely nothing. She reassures herself that an ignorant girl who only knows how to throw tantrums couldn't possibly possess that kind of political talent. She casually changes the subject, asking if there's been any word from the second consort's secluded Lycoris palace. Mary quietly replies that there is absolutely no response. Cleo maliciously smirks, calling the second consort a truly ridiculous woman for remaining hopelessly bound to the past, cowardly pretending not to notice whether her own daughter lives or dies. Back in the day, the second consort, Elaine, was considered the absolute most beautiful woman in the entire empire. But unfortunately, her stunning looks were actually her greatest curse. Her greedy family was completely preparing to sell her off to the highest bidder, despite it being a totally open secret that she was deeply in love with a commoner guardian knight. From the very beginning, their star-crossed romance was completely doomed. Tragically oblivious to the cutthroat political reality, Elaine just fell head over heels into puppy love, completely turning a blind eye to the danger. Cleo maliciously laughs, asking if the foolish girl actually believed her lover would survive if she just sacrificed herself. Cleo calls her incredibly naive. She coldly points out that if Elaine was pregnant with the Emperor's child, she absolutely should have known that her former lover would obviously be brutally assassinated to eliminate any loose ends. Cleo smirks, noting that in comparison, Princess Titania was actually incredibly lucky. Because she was born a daughter and not a political threat like a son, her life was ultimately spared. The Emperor perfectly weaponized Elaine's obscure background, using it as the main justification to force an engagement between his flawed daughter and the powerful young Duke. He basically told the Duke he was overlooking the rumors about his wife's status in exchange for marrying his future daughter to Castline. But the Duke didn't just blindly accept the forced proposal outright. He cleverly attached a massive condition. The official wedding could only be held after Titania's official coming-of-age ceremony. Because it was a half-forced political engagement binding his house from the literal moment she was born, the Duke strictly demanded that Titania's birth must absolutely never be swept up in scandalous rumors of an affair. So regardless of the Emperor's fragile ego, Elaine's lover was entirely destined to die to secure the deal. Cleo maliciously smiles, fully assuming that because Elaine was forced to give birth to a daughter who ruined her life, there's absolutely no way she could ever genuinely love Titania. Her inner monologue is suddenly interrupted by a maid, who awkwardly stammers that there is still absolutely no new news from the Empress's palace. Cleo's eyes completely narrow, her voice turning deadly quiet. She logically deduces that there's no way the foolish princess or her sickly, isolated mother could have taken action against her spies. The absolute only person left who could pull off a flawless cover-up is the Empress. Cleo knows the Empress is terrifyingly clever and excessively cautious, making sure she rarely leaves a single traceable trail. Cleo furiously wonders why the usually stoic empress is suddenly stepping up to protect the princess this time. In a flashback to the night of the incident, we see the empress's massive, heavily fortified palace standing tall in the dark. As the official mother of the imperial family, if a major problem arises in her domain, the empress is technically forced to take responsibility. The head maid, Mary, nervously reports to Cleo that Titania still hasn't woken up, frantically apologizing that there have been absolutely no noticeable changes in the empress's heavily guarded palace. Cleo coldly hums, her patience completely snapping. She orders Mary to aggressively gather every single child working in the ruined Rose Palace. With a completely unhinged smile, Cleo commands Mary to ruthlessly abuse them. Whether she whips them or literally throws them down a well and pulls them back out, she doesn't care. She tells Mary to make absolutely sure they look completely starved, sleep-deprived, and completely ragged before bringing them to her. Mary physically trembles, terrified by the sheer cruelty, but quickly bows and stammers that she will carry out the order. Cleo stares out the window, tapping her ring. She calculatingly muses that if a frog refuses to come out of its hole, you just have to aggressively poke around the hole until it completely snaps. She flashes a truly terrifying, villainous smile. Back in the present, Prince Adrian sits across from Titania, softly asking how her body feels. Titania smiles brightly, assuring him she's perfectly fine. She smoothly jokes that he should honestly be way more worried about the exhausted high priest who spent days trying to heal her. Adrian warmly laughs, saying he's genuinely glad she looks so well. Adrian leans in, his expression turning slightly more serious. He casually mentions he heard a very interesting rumor directly from the young duke. Apparently, Her Highness actually asked Raymond to specifically seek him out during the palace crisis. Titania casually waves it off, playing dumb and saying it's really nothing much. Adrian just stares at her, a perfectly unreadable smile on his face. He drops his chin into his hands, gently challenging her claim that it was nothing much. He points out that it was a massive, incredibly risky move for the usually ultra-cautious Adrian to suddenly step forward and involve himself in such a highly volatile incident. He calmly asks her to imagine what would have happened if he hadn't conveniently been perfectly positioned to find Bibi first. He notes that the second prince's political position could have instantly become incredibly awkward and dangerous. Adrian easily brushes it off, smiling warmly and saying that thanks to her very public concern for him, he now has a perfectly solid excuse to safely stay right here in the Empress's impenetrable lilac palace. Titania just blankly responds, "Oh, is that so?" In a rapid series of flashbacks, she remembers exactly how aggressively decisive the House of Casline can be. If Adrian hadn't basically offered her the ultimate sanctuary in his mother's palace, the Duke's Knights would have violently taken over the entire Rose Palace, literally thrown out every single suspicious staff member by their collars, violently barged straight into her sick mother's Lycoris palace, or simply found some legally watertight excuse to completely drag her out of the imperial palace entirely. Titania physically shivers, muttering to herself that now that she actually says it out loud, every single one of those alternate timelines was an absolute worst-case scenario nightmare. She finally realizes the brilliant, flawless truth. Siding with the Empress wasn't just a good idea, it was the absolute best choice she could have possibly made. Adrian is incredibly smart and practical, so he won't unnecessarily bother her too much, allowing them to keep their strictly give-and-take alliance perfectly balanced. Adrian sighs softly, his expression turning genuinely sympathetic. He admits he understands that Titania and her mother are so incredibly used to surviving entirely on their own that they barely even know what it's like to gracefully receive help. He confesses he genuinely thought she and the Casline family completely despised each other, but seeing how violently protective the Duke's men were, that obviously isn't true at all. Titania takes a sip of her tea, totally bored by his fake sympathy. She casually replies that she simply watched her fiancé closely and just naturally picked things up along the way. She picks up a cookie, noting that the Casline family is completely surrounded on all sides by incredibly powerful enemies and greedy leeches constantly trying to violently squeeze triple the profit out of any tiny act of kindness. She completely respects that they are a house that fiercely survived all of that absolute chaos completely alone. She takes a bite, casually concluding that maybe all that hardcore survival is exactly why. They are actually incredibly weak to genuine, pure goodwill. She smirks, noting that there are very few people left in the entire world who can actually offer that kind of selfless help to the powerful Caslines in the first place. A hilarious flashback suddenly shows the normally terrifying, strictly composed Duke completely losing his absolute mind. The second Bibi entered his office, he hysterically screamed for everyone except His Highness to get out immediately. In the present, Titania watches Adrian happily munching on a cookie, dryly noting that this incredibly relaxing vibe must be exactly what her mother's peaceful me time feels like. Titania closes her eyes, firmly deciding that even if she had the power to magically turn back time and completely avoid the injuries, she would absolutely still throw herself in harm's way to save Bibai all over again. Adrian leans forward, his voice completely serious. He notes that she seems to know a surprisingly terrifying amount of highly classified information about the Castline family. Titania just smoothly deflects, casually replying, "Well, yes." She dramatically sighs, asking how she couldn't know all their secrets after literally going through absolute hell with them. She finally decides to drop the act and give him the rough, heavily edited outline of exactly what happened. A week ago, right after Raymond violently pulled her half-dead body from the underground labyrinth and rushed her straight to the Lilac Palace, which was incredibly close to the Central Gardens. The Castline Knights essentially, forcibly invited, the Empire's high priest at sword point, aggressively hauling in all sorts of incredibly rare, highly expensive magical artifacts to desperately save her life. She smoothly claims that thanks to their incredibly aggressive medical intervention, her body apparently fully recovered in just a single day. But while everyone absolutely panicked because she still stubbornly wouldn't wake up from her supposed coma, Titania hilariously reveals she was actually just enjoying the world's most comfortable, stress-free nap for a full week. During that entire chaotic week, the fiercely loyal Castline retainers basically set up a fully armed military camp right inside the Empress's palace, making them completely untouchable even to the furious emperor. The emperor was totally trapped. He absolutely couldn't legally stop them from aggressively caring for his own daughter's betrothed in name, and since they had heavily fortified themselves in the Empress's domain of all places, he couldn't just forcefully kick them out with his royal guards either. Titania completely gloats, declaring that the Empress's palace was effectively on a total, unbreakable lockdown. Not a single bit of genuine information about her surprisingly rapid recovery ever leaked outside to Cleo's desperate spies. Titania smiles warmly at Adrian, smoothly explaining that since the Castline family is currently laying low to avoid the Emperor's wrath, they can't openly protect her right now. She points out that the palace is currently an absolute mess because of the recent chaos. In a flashback, the maids from the ruined Rose Palace are seen desperately crying and begging the Empress to tell them if Princess Titania is still alive. They hysterically wail that as lowly servants who failed to protect their mistress, they have absolutely no hope of surviving the Emperor's punishment. Adrian watches the crying maids, his expression completely unreadable. He finally smiles, a chilling, calculating look in his eyes. Titania deadpans, noting that the maids' acting skills are actually incredibly impressive. She watches them sob, admitting they genuinely look like a complete, miserable wreck. But Titania knows better. She tells Adrian she'd bet anything this entire dramatic performance is actually Empress Cleo's handiwork, designed specifically to put his mother in a massive tight spot. She explains the trap. If the Empress admits Titania is alive and safely inside, but still throws the maids out, the entire court will brand her as incredibly cruel to her servants. But if the Empress claims it was her own personal wish to completely bar the Rose Palace staff from entering, she won't be able to legally keep the Lilac Palace on lockdown any longer. Titania sighs, pointing out that because of the political tension, they can't even publicly bring up how horribly neglectful those maids actually were to her. And since the maids cleverly framed their visit as coming out of deep concern for their injured mistress, outright rejecting them would only make the Empress look incredibly small-minded and petty to the public. Titania concludes that this entire circus is just another one of Cleo's calculated schemes to test the waters. No matter how the Empress responds, her dignity and reputation will definitely take a massive hit. She notes that simply forcing the Empress to make a difficult choice is already a massive win for Cleo. It's the exact price the Empress has to pay for turning a blind eye while the Castlines aggressively treated Titania in her palace. Titania calmly takes a sip of her tea, deciding that either way she owes the Empress a massive debt for saving her life, so she has to find a way to settle it right now. Adrian leans in, genuinely curious, and asks what she thinks they should do. Titania asks if he's successfully rooted out all of Cleo's hidden spies inside the Empress's palace. Adrian confidently confirms he has, assuring her that none of them can get anywhere near her private rooms. But Titania points out a massive flaw. They still can't completely hide the comings and goings of the Castline Knights who are treating her. She knows Cleo's spies are aggressively pushing the issue because they know no one currently has the official standing to legally stop them. She explains that House Castline is currently in her debt and lying low, but they would gladly clash head-on with the imperial family if she asked them to. She realizes that's exactly why Cleo chose this specific moment to strike. While the main Castline force has temporarily stepped out, Titania warns that if the Empress personally drags those servants out, Cleo will immediately spread vicious rumors that she's doing something incredibly shady with the injured princess. They can't touch the maids without a valid pretext, but letting them freely enter the secure palace is even worse. Titania's eyes sharpen with absolute determination. She tells Adrian she has a plan. She instructs him to go out there and lie to the maids, telling them her breathing is still incredibly faint and unstable. Adrian looks skeptical, asking if they'll actually believe that. Titania smirks, saying it doesn't matter what they believe because they can just ask the high priest next door to officially testify for them. She confidently points out that since the high priest was literally kidnapped and brought here by the Castlines, he is way more likely to follow their wishes than the Emperor's right now. Titania flashes a truly wicked, villainous smile. She tells Adrian that since the maids claim to be so deeply worried about her, she'll make absolutely sure to repay their overflowing concern. She laughs, saying that if they're so anxious they can't eat or sleep, they should gladly undergo the exact same hardships as saints, entirely of their own free will. She claps her hands together in mock prayer, declaring that they need to prove their loyal hearts with very, very sincere devotion. With a terrifyingly bright smile, she suggests asking the high priest to officially lead a mandatory prayer vigil for her recovery right outside the Empress's palace. Adrian completely pales, sweating bullets as he realizes how incredibly ruthless her plan is. Titania maliciously promises to show those Rose Palace rats exactly what words have power really means. She plans to assign strict guards to heavily watch over them for the entire duration. She darkly chuckles, stating that naturally, this intense prayer vigil will have to continue absolutely without rest until their precious mistress finally regains consciousness. Outside, the high priest is sweating profusely, completely baffled as to how he ended up leading this ridiculous circus. He nervously addresses the exhausted, kneeling maids, telling them that Her Majesty assured him there's nothing to worry about, but for Princess Titania's sake, they need to show their utmost devotion. He awkwardly praises them for managing a strict fasting prayer, claiming their incredible sincerity will surely wake the princess very soon. The maids are absolutely miserable, trembling from exhaustion and hunger. One of the maids internally screams that this is basically literal torture. She weakly tries to speak up, but the high priest immediately cuts her off, cheerfully telling the dear faithful that they absolutely must not stop praying. The high priest internally sighs. He knows that for his own master's well-being, he has to keep this charade going. He gently scolds the maid, warning her that stopping her prayers now might actually bring terrible harm to Her Highness instead. With a perfectly serene, holy smile, he claps his hands and cheerfully commands everyone to do their absolute best and begin praying again. The head maid Mary is completely drenched in sweat, her eyes wide with absolute terror and exhaustion. She desperately whispers for someone to save her. But internally, she's screaming that she'd rather just die than keep doing this. Back inside, Titania is happily enjoying a lavish dessert tower. She smiles, noting that it's been 3 full days since the maids voluntarily began their grueling prayer meetings. She sighs happily, declaring this is the life. She watches the miserable maids through the window, cheerfully noting that watching them suffer makes her sweets taste even better. Little Bibi happily asks if the sweets are delicious. Titania warmly smiles, thanking her and telling her to eat as much as she likes. Titania takes a bite of a cookie, incredibly satisfied. She knows that by now, the Empress must feel quite vindicated after dealing such a massive, humiliating blow to consort Cleo's spies. She reflects on the complex politics of the palace. Until now, the balance of power had been subtly shifting. Although the Empress comes from an absolutely impeccable lineage and is the mother of the highly capable second prince, her greatest fatal flaw is that she completely lacks the Emperor's favor. But that definitely doesn't mean any servant actually dares to look down on her. It's simply that they fear the ruthless consort Cleo far more. Cleo crushes people with a sweet smile, using absolute fear to subjugate her enemies and massive wealth to buy their loyalty. Having received the legendary Ocean of Stars jewel from the Emperor as a public token of his favor, Cleo acts like she has absolutely nothing to fear. Yet Titania knows that even if the current Empress were to suddenly pass away, the chances of Cleo actually becoming the new Empress are extremely slim, entirely due to her lineage. Cleo is an illegitimate child, born between Marquis Rand and his mistress. Since children were incredibly scarce in the Marquis's house, the only legitimate heirs were the eldest son and the legitimate daughter, who was practically destined from birth to become the Empress. However, the entire political landscape changed overnight when that legitimate daughter suddenly died. Unable to let go of their powerful ties to the imperial family, the desperate Marquis's house violently thrust Cleo, who had literally been acting as her half-sister's lowly maid, before the Emperor, making her an imperial consort instead. Though the relationship between Cleo and the Marquis was incredibly strained, they immediately formed a ruthless alliance once Brian was born. completely determined to make him the next emperor. To successfully seat Brian on the throne, they absolutely needed to undermine the current empress's unshakable position. Thus, Cleo weaponized the emperor's blatant favor to constantly slight and threaten the empress, aggressively expanding her own toxic influence. As a result of this relentless campaign, the empress was gradually losing her solid footing within the treacherous palace. Titania looks at Bibai, her thoughts turning dark. She realizes the empress must have faced countless, terrifying assassination attempts over the years. She feels incredibly relieved that Adrian finally managed to weed out all the rat-like spies inside the Lilac Palace recently. Titania watches Bibai happily munching on a pastry, gently noting that the little girl is pushing herself way too hard right now. Bibai freezes, nervously sweating as she plays dumb, claiming she has absolutely no idea what Titania means. Titania gives her a knowing, deadpan stare. She points out that Bibai is clearly overexerting herself just for her sake. Titania sighs, incredibly frustrated. If even the sweet protagonist is acting this hypervigilant, just how long does the House of Castlane plan to make such a massive fuss over her? She lists off all their incredibly over-the-top actions. First, the notoriously strict Duke sent a personal, handwritten letter of gratitude. Then the mad dog Lysianthus suddenly started acting totally friendly, awkwardly asking if she was feeling all right. And now, the famously stoic Raymond is literally visiting her every single day just to ensure she's unharmed. Titania glances at the new maid standing behind Bibai, realizing with a chill that the woman is actually a highly trained former assassin. It's painfully obvious the Castlines have absolutely zero intention of letting their guard down, even for a simple tea time. But still, Titania genuinely wonders what's so wrong with pushing herself just a little bit to secure her own safety. Bibai suddenly slams her tiny fists on the table, proudly declaring that her papa taught her a member of the ducal house never forgets a kindness or a grudge. Bibai looks at Titania with massive, tear-filled eyes, passionately stating that it's only natural for her to look after her sister now. She cries that if it weren't for Titania's brave sacrifice, she definitely would have died in that dark labyrinth. Titania's heart completely melts. She gently tells Bibai that she is a truly blessed child who absolutely deserves to be loved and protected. She softly adds that in terrifying situations like that, the older person is always supposed to take responsibility anyway. She admits she was absolutely terrified when the beast attacked. But she firmly reminds herself that she is Titania now, and she knows full well she can never go back to her old life. Yet the harsh reality that there is absolutely no one left in this world to genuinely love her made her truly believe it wouldn't even matter if she died saving this precious child. Titania forces a reassuring smile, promising Bibai that she absolutely won't tell anyone about the secret regarding Imperial Consort Elaine. As expected, there has been absolutely no word from the secluded Lycoris Palace since the incident. Titania knows that since the entire palace is buzzing about her near-death experience, Bibai must have definitely heard the news that her mother never even checked on her. Before her regression, Bibai was horribly abused by terrible foster parents, which is highly likely why she deeply sympathizes with Titania's tragic family situation. Titania smiles sadly. Bibai might not know it yet, but because Titania read the original story, she knows the absolute truth. Bibai's birth mother was actually an incredibly powerful woman who gave birth to her after a brief but passionate romance. Though she vanished after leaving Bibai at an orphanage with a special necklace, she truly, deeply loved her child. Bibai was never actually abandoned. Her mother fiercely fought against the entire world just to protect her. Bibai suddenly stammers, looking incredibly nervous but determined. She looks up with massive, pleading eyes, asking if she can just stay by Titania's side forever. Titania gently smiles, asking if her love and blessing wouldn't be enough for the little girl. Bibai frantically shakes her head, insisting she'd be truly grateful to stay by her side, but Titania gently cuts her off. Titania softly tells her that they should be closer than strangers, but more distant than actual family. Bibai is completely shocked by the rejection. Bibai frantically asks why, totally heartbroken. Titania's expression turns dead serious. She bluntly explains that it's because they have incredibly dangerous enemies. Bibai is confused, but Titania clarifies that the House of Castlane has many powerful enemies, and she has a massive target on her back too. She knows that in the end, all of this chaotic palace drama is being flawlessly orchestrated by the wicked imperial consort Cleo. Until now, Cleo had never directly targeted the Castlane family. They were simply too formidable an opponent to openly antagonize, yet way too powerful to just leave unmonitored. So Cleo merely watched from the sidelines, using a perfect, disposable bait like Titania to test the waters. Titania realizes the terrifying truth. If her relationship with the House of Castline smoothly mends because of this incident and she actually marries Raymond, Cleo will absolutely try to manipulate the entire ducal house by using her as a political hostage. Bibai fiercely declares that they can handle that much. Titania looks at the brave little girl, knowing it's only natural for Bibai to hesitate. Bibai finally has a real family. She is surrounded by incredibly precious people who deeply cherish and love one another. Titania asks herself if she could really ask this sweet child to risk the safety of everyone she loves just for her sake. She firmly decides that makes absolutely no sense, nor should Bibai ever have to make that choice. But Bibai stubbornly refuses to back down, screaming that they can absolutely handle it. She frantically suggests that if Titania and Raymond just get married a bit sooner, everything will be fine. Titania instantly and aggressively rejects the idea. Bibai pouts, asking why not since her eldest brother is so amazing. Titania just firmly repeats her no. Bibai desperately argues that if Titania officially joins the House of Castline, they can definitely protect her from Cleo. Titania internally screams, pointing out that divorce is hard enough as it is in this world, so who on earth gets married just for protection? Bibai confidently declares she's sure her brother would agree to the early marriage too. Titania's blood pressure absolutely spikes. She glares at the kid, asking if she really thinks that's even remotely possible. Titania knows exactly how the original novel goes. Raymond is the kind of stoic male lead who will eventually say incredibly cheesy lines like, "With what sort of gaze I have been watching you all this time? I am merely glad that you seem to have finally realized it." But he's supposed to say that to the original female lead, absolutely not her. Titania crosses her arms, asking what exactly it is that Raymond would supposedly agree to. Suddenly, the doors open and Raymond casually walks in. Bibai excitedly jumps up, cheering that her brother is just in time. Titania absolutely panics. Bibai immediately runs to Raymond, loudly tattling that she told Titania she would absolutely be on her side, but the princess completely refused. Raymond looks slightly surprised. Bibai continues her flawless snitching, loudly declaring that Titania said it's because Castline would be put in massive danger due to the person trying to use her. Titania frantically yells at Bibai, absolutely horrified that the kid is tattling on her word for word. Bibai ignores her, happily telling Raymond her brilliant solution. Why don't they just move up the wedding between him and Titania? Titania internally screams, knowing Raymond will look completely appalled and ask what on earth this crazy kid is talking about. But instead, absolute silence fills the room. Raymond just stares blankly at them. Titania stares at him in pure horror. She mentally screams, asking if he is seriously considering this ridiculous idea right now. Raymond finally breaks the silence, calmly stating that moving up the wedding could indeed be one highly effective way to handle the political situation. Titania absolutely loses her mind, screaming at him and asking if he's completely lost his mind. Raymond completely ignores her panic, calmly calculating that the emperor would actually agree to an early wedding. Titania absolutely loses it, reminding him she already said no and warning that the emperor would just use their marriage to manipulate them. But Raymond smoothly cuts her off, flexing that the House of Castrain is more than strong enough to protect their own duchess. Titania grips the table, internally screaming that she isn't worth starting a massive political war over, calling them absolute lunatics. Dropping the comedic act, Titania stands up and looks them dead in the eye. With a serious expression, she firmly apologizes, bluntly stating that she just can't bring herself to trust the ducal house.